I started this channel in 2018 with the intention of making this video series and one other, then leaving, as I didn't expect this channel to go anywhere. That has obviously changed, especially with the recognition that there actually is a lot of things I want to talk about. To everyone who has been here from the start, I am sorry this has taken so long to come out, but I feel it's beneficial, as I've learned a lot in this time and have remade the first two parts in this series to make vast improvements to them, and it's helped me figure out how to tackle some issues I had scripting this video. This is the fourth part of my video series, analyzing and criticizing Fallout 4. I recommend watching the first three parts if you have not yet seen them. Now, it wasn't my intention to start this video off with this section, and this is more of a last-minute change, as motivation has struck me on this particular topic, and I now feel it's most important to put up front. As I've learned over the years since starting this YouTube channel, one of the most frequently used defenses of Fallout 4 is that the shooting is great. The shooting is better than it's ever been. The shooting is better than Fallout 3. No offense intended towards the people who make these kinds of comments, but I've come to the realization that this argument comes across as a cope defense. The main story of Fallout 4 is almost universally seen as bad, with the lead writer himself all but admitting he didn't put much effort into it, and even many fans of Fallout 4 admitting that the story isn't good. The RPG mechanics, as I'll get to later, are very lackluster or outright gone, and settlement building is half-baked, so what's left to defend? Essentially, it's the very subjective things. I find the exploration fun. I like the crafting system. I enjoy the Fallout aesthetic. That is, except the gunplay. Saying the gunplay is better than Fallout 3 is a fantastic example of a cope argument, because Fallout 3 set the bar so low that it's just lying on the ground. So anything better than that, even marginally, would be seen as an improvement. While the shooting of Fallout 4 absolutely is an improvement over 3, I don't think it's nearly as great as it's hyped up to be by the people who like this game. That's not to say it's outright bad either. It's a fine system on its own, and I probably wouldn't have looked twice at it had it not been for this defense being so incredibly common. The problem is that when everyone starts pointing to this one aspect as the game's saving grace, well, it better fucking deliver. And unfortunately, in Fallout 4, it simply doesn't. Again, that's not to say that this system is bad. It is not bad. In fact, I even kind of like it and can have fun with it. The point I'm making here is that it's mediocre, and not that great of a defense for the game. There's two major components to this: the enemies, and the general feel of the guns, and I'd argue both fall short. Starting off with enemies, the first big problem comes from the fact that most of the enemies in the game can feel like bullet sponges on normal difficulty or higher, at least until you get over-leveled, and additionally, their AI isn't great. Sure, sometimes NPCs will take cover, but oftentimes they'll just stand out in the open and tank your bullets. More on that later. There seems to be little to no tactical plans from the AI, with little to no self-preservation. They won't ever intentionally try to flank you or drive you out of cover, though it can happen by coincidence depending on where you take cover. You can't wear them down or wait for them to run out of ammo or anything of the sort. Granted, in most games the enemies don't run out of ammo, so I won't hold that against Fallout 4. In that sense, the combat isn't that much different from Fallout 3 and New Vegas. This applies to the three most common enemy types: humans of various allegiance, super mutants, and synths. Yes, Bethesda super mutants are dumb, but even they should be smart enough to know and learn basic survival and self-preservation. This less so applies to feral ghouls, because it actually does make total sense that they would charge you head-on with no intelligent tactics. Similar for most wild animals too, in fact. If you point a gun at a bear, it's probably not going to understand what it is. If it wants to make a meal out of you, then it makes sense for it to charge you head-on. Deathclaws provide sort of the interesting difference here, where they actually will try to avoid gunfire sometimes. I actually like this detail, as it implies them to be more intelligent than most people both in and out of game might think, but also smarter than most humans in the game as well, since most of them can't or won't attempt this. Remember, the enemy totally can't hit you if you're standing up with no cover and not attempting to dodge at all. Okay, the enemies aren't that great in terms of tactics and AI, so surely at least the guns should feel good to shoot, right? There should be lots of love, care, and attention to detail paid to this aspect, right? Well, no. Some people might claim these aspects are more superficial as well, but they actually have a big impact on how good it feels to use weapons in a game. For the sake of proving this point, I've gotten footage and compared the guns and how they act in Fallout 4 to other first-person shooter games, and to make things fair and reasonable, I won't be comparing this to something like Escape from Tarkov, which goes above and beyond for portraying guns. The games I'm using for comparison are the original Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, the first and last Call of Duty game I've ever purchased, Half-Life 2, as well as Black Mesa, the fan-made remake of the original Half-Life, Dusk, 7 Days to Die, and Fear. Now while each game provided could be a bit of a mixed bag in terms of feeling, they all do something better than Fallout 4 does, with Fallout 4 falling short of games made over a decade before it, as well as indie games in major areas. That's obviously not to say that Fallout 4 should necessarily be the best at some aspect of portraying guns. There can only be one that is the best. The problem isn't that it's not the best, it's that it's mediocre in its portrayal. The things I'm looking at is the general feeling and feedback of using a weapon. How good is its recoil, animations, how well aimed down sights works, as well as the animation for it, weapon inertia for when your character moves around, how good is the impact of the guns, and do enemies respond to taking hits, as well as the sounds of the guns. These aspects combined contribute largely to the overall feel of guns in games. If one or more of these aspects is a bit lacking, that won't ruin the entire feeling. However, some aspects carry more weight than others. For example, one of the things I initially looked at was if shell casings appeared on the ground when they come out of your weapons, across these several games, including Fallout 4. This is obviously something that's going to be far less impactful to how guns feel, as opposed to really good sound design, or weapons having proper impact. For the record, the shell casings thing was very much a mixed bag, though it seemed like the Half-Life games might have handled this best. I'm also not going to be looking at every single gun, only the more common ones that people are likely going to see and use on an average playthrough. First of all, many of the guns are left-handed guns, but are clearly used by a right-handed person. This is an issue because most guns are designed so that empty bullet casings will be ejected away from the operator. In real life, this is important because the hot brass will almost certainly be painful if it touches skin, and that could potentially be distracting in critical moments. What we see here in Fallout 4 is ridiculous, because the hot brass from some of these weapons is literally flying directly into the camera, which is Nate or Nora's face. And if they're not hitting your face, they're possibly going down your shirt, which is really bad too. Additionally, the casings being ejected in front of your face across your line of sight can be distracting in-game, and probably in real life too. I have no idea why Bethesda decided a large portion of their guns should eject the casings across the player's view from the left side of the gun, when it can be distracting like this. Maybe they thought it looked cool, but to anyone who knows anything about guns, this is just frustrating and annoying. For a point of comparison, all of the other games I played as examples that actually show the shell casings get this right. At least from the guns I saw in use. I didn't play all of Modern Warfare 2 to find out if every gun is correct in this matter. However, Half-Life 2, Black Mesa, 7 Days to Die, and Fear all got this right. 7 Days in particular has a really satisfying animation that's kinda reminiscent of how the sniper reloads his gun in the Meet the Sniper video for Team Fortress 2. The issue isn't even that the guns are left-handed, but they're left-handed being wielded by a right-handed person. The really weird part, though, is that this only applies to some of the guns in Fallout 4, and I can't for the life of me figure out why. Guns like the 10mm, the minigun, and the combat shotgun eject their casings and shells to the right, as they should. Guns like the hunting rifle, and its variants such as the 50 cal sniper, as well as the submachine gun, eject to the left. The assault rifle is just a goddamn anomaly, as it ejects to the right, but the casings defy physics and fly over to the left, Again, clipping into the camera sometimes, and probably going down your shirt other times. There's a port on the side that should be ejecting them straight out to the right, but looking closer at the animation, the casings actually clip straight through the gun itself so they can fly off to the left for some reason. Bethesda, what the hell are you doing? Recoil is very much a mixed bag for Fallout 4. In some instances they get it right, in others they don't. Some of this might be an unintended side effect of the weapon modification system, combined with Bethesda's laziness. For example, a double-barreled shotgun with a full stock is actually fairly accurate to how it should look. However, a sawed-off shotgun with a pistol grip has the exact same animation, and it should have a lot more recoil or kickback. Oh, here's a double-barreled shotgun I grabbed.
Oh, that needs way more recoil. Yeah, no, a double-barrel shotgun, a 12-gauge double-barrel shotgun should 100% have way more recoil than that. It's also very slow, the recoil.
Yeah. Are we assuming that we're braced here against the shoulder tight?
Let's do this. Ooh. Oh! That is so much worse. Holy shit.
Oh my god, it is a pistol grip.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Freaking hard.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I was like, it's just a pistol grip, so it should like fly up into the air quite a bit.
Yeah, the recoil looks 100 times worse in third person. And this matters because this is what NPCs are going to be looking like when they shoot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that has like no recoil at all. Jesus.
Yeah, let me show you this. This is him using birdshot, and keep in mind, this is Kentucky Ballistics, and you know how much of a beast he is.
All right.
And like I said, I would even point out the fact that, now keep in mind, Kentucky Ballistics is built like a brick shit house.
So the recoil's not that bad with birdshot, so I'm going to go ahead and one-hand it.
And this is birdshot, which is way less recoil than if you go up.
Kind of shoot from down here with.
Yeah, and you wouldn't be shooting birdshot in Fallout 4. You'd be shooting buckshot.
This problem extends to many other weapons, but not all. The combat shotgun doesn't have as much kick or recoil as it probably should. The laser rifle shouldn't have any at all. Remember, ballistic weapons have the recoil they do because they're firing a physical projectile with a lot of force, which is caused by the ignition of the gunpowder within the bullet casing. This is essentially a small explosion causing pressurized gases to propel the bullet out of the barrel. This process is why there's recoil when shooting a normal gun. A laser gun, while fictional, is based upon the idea that it's shooting a bolt of light energy, something that isn't physical, from the equivalent of what the barrel would be. Because that process of pressurized gases isn't there logically shouldn't be any recoil to firing a laser weapon. Some weapons are half decent for this in Fallout 4, however. The machine gun isn't too bad, revolvers aren't too bad, the 10mm pistol is pretty decent. However, again, the games I'm comparing this to surpass Fallout 4 in this regard. The pistols simply feel more impactful when shooting, with there being more recoil. This is especially true for the revolver as well, particularly in the Half-Life games. Now, I mentioned the shotguns already and compared them to some real-life examples, but let's compare them to my selection of games as well, excluding Fear and Modern Warfare 2, because I didn't go far enough in those games to get the shotgun, if they even have them. Half-Life 2 would be the clear winner here, if it weren't for Black Mesa doing the recoil even better. 7 Days to Die is a close runner-up with its shotguns as well. As mentioned, the submachine gun in Fallout 4 has pretty decent recoil. It might actually be one of the best in the game. I'm not even going to compare it to the other games, it's just good and I like it. Next up is the animation to aim down sights, and I feel Fallout 4 really misses the mark here. If you're in a kill or be killed situation, where you need to aim and shoot someone else so you can continue living, then you'd want to get that gun up close and personal as soon as possible. Fallout 4 generally feels really sluggish in this regard. While it might not seem like that big of a deal to the average person, that time can absolutely matter, and personally, when I'm playing an FPS, I like my animations to be pretty snappy. I don't like to have to wait around to shoot if I don't have to. 7 Days to Die comes out on top in this regard. Every weapon I've tested aim down sights on, your character gets the gun up very quickly and ready to fire pretty much at a moment's notice. Now obviously you can't do this for every gun. For example, a minigun would naturally be slower to move into position, though I'm not even sure it makes sense to aim down sights on a minigun. Part of the point of a minigun is that you don't need precision aiming. Modern Warfare 2 also does this very well. This is something that New Vegas also fails at. The gun will just teleport into aim down sights mode, rather than have a proper animation for going into that mode. In fact, even Fallout 4 at least does this better than New Vegas does, as Fallout 4 has animations for going into aim down sights mode. Weapon inertia is something a lot of people might not even notice, but it makes a huge impact if it's something you're aware of. And thanks to two of my friends, I'm never going to unsee this anytime I'm playing a first-person shooter, and now I shall curse you with being unable to unsee this as well. Fallout 4 does this to a degree, but once again I feel as though it falls short. Just for comparison, Fear doesn't actually have this at all. The gun remains stationary as you move. However, the other selection of games once again beats out Fallout 4. It's actually kind of hard to tell which one is best, as the Half-Life games, 7 Days to Die, and Dusk all do this very well. The reason this is impactful is because if there's no inertia, like in Fear, it looks and feels as though your character is a chiseled stone statue rotating in a circle, as opposed to a real person moving through an environment and actually holding a weapon with weight. Real weapons have weight to them, and when you're turning from one side to the other, that weapon and your arms are not going to remain hard-locked in the same position. When it does remain hard-locked in games, it feels stiff, but it also feels like you're bringing a magic wand out, as opposed to bearing down on an enemy with a deadly weapon. Fear gets around the magic wand issue by making the weapons impactful in other ways, but in a game like Half-Life 2 and Black Mesa, it feels like there's weight to the weapon as you're turning to shoot an enemy. Impact is arguably one of the most important aspects to this. If I'm firing my boomstick, then I want to have some kind of impact. Fallout 4 seems to outright fail in this regard for the most part. We have the Skyrim effect here, where it feels like you're hitting your enemies with a wet pool noodle, rather than a deadly weapon. After doing some testing, I found that most enemies will outright tank shots from you, as though they're the goddamn Terminator. They almost never react to being shot in any way. No flinch from pain, nor being physically impacted by the bullet. The only exception where they seem to react at all is if they get crippled in one of their body parts. Now to be fair, not all games get this right either. Half-Life 2 is a bit of a mixed bag, where sometimes I could get an enemy to react to being shot, and other times they just simply don't. However, killing enemies is far more effective in their impacts. In most modern games, enemies will ragdoll when you kill them. With Fallout 4, this seems to happen immediately upon death, with there being little to no momentum when you kill someone. They will often just flop down dead. In Half-Life 2, you can see the impact these weapons have upon characters when they die. 7 Days similarly has the zombies react pretty decently to taking hits, and it's a bit of a mixed bag when they die. Some have impact, some flop dead. 7 Days is actually a bit weird on this because each zombie model seems to have individual knockdown and stagger animations, and they seem to be applied to any kind of attack, even melee. It's obviously not among the best, but still far preferable to enemies being completely unfazed by getting a full blast of buckshot to the chest, or taking a 50 caliber round at point blank range as though it's a gentle breeze. This gets even worse when you're using the rocket launcher. Some enemies can take significant damage while charging you, and not be slowed down in the slightest from multiple shots, and even finally killing them seems to have little impact. And don't go off about the Mirelurk's hard shell, that can only protect so much, and it clearly isn't protecting that much if significant chunks of its health are coming off with each shot. Dusk also shows enemies recoiling from taking damage, and has some pretty good kill animations. It is incredibly satisfying to kill enemies in Dusk, oh my god. Fear and Modern Warfare 2 seem to do this best of all. In Modern Warfare 2, I was able to shoot the legs out from under someone. It seemed like they fell fairly realistically, and most enemies seem to respond really well when taking hits. As for Fear, there's a lot of absolutely fantastic environment design for hitting certain objects for bullet impacts, including stacks of paper and wall impacts, but the enemies too feel like they're being hit by bullets, as they'll double over or recoil from shots that clearly hit them. They'll stumble and stagger, and limp away if they've been shot in the legs. They'll even hop on one foot if you shot them in the foot. Honestly, it's a night and day difference, and it's a bit sad that a game from a decade before Fallout 4 was made absolutely nailed this aspect, where Fallout 4 seems to fail almost entirely. Unironically, the shooting in the original Fear is just straight up objectively better than Fallout 4. In Fallout 4, you can shoot physics props in the world and they'll react, but that's like the bare minimum you should have in your FPS game. It's purely a prop being affected by the impact of a projectile, rather than the level of detail a game like Fear has. The best thing Fallout 4 has going for it as far as impact goes is a carryover from Fallout 3 in New Vegas, which itself was a carryover from the originals, and that's the extreme gore. This actually is really satisfying in Fallout 4, and is easily one of the biggest redeeming factors to the shooting in Fallout 4. While it fails in showing impact and living targets being hit, Fallout 4 hits a home run when it comes to showing the impact when one of the limb explosion animations actually triggers. This is one of the few times shooting enemies feels really impactful, because it actually does give weight to the shooting in this game. That said, it sometimes feels like the game tried to go easier on this aspect than Fallout 3. When gathering footage for this section in particular, I had killed a few dozen enemies, and very few of them ever had a limb explosion from regular combat. It might have just been bad luck, I don't know. Finally, we have the sounds of the guns, and I honestly don't have too much to say on them. They do genuinely sound pretty good for the most part, even in comparison to the other games. It's also worth noting that the pipe revolver seems to share the exact animations with the other revolvers in the game. This makes the pipe guns feel like just another gun, as opposed to a unique class of weapons that exist to be the lowest tier of gun. Take 7 Days to Die for example, which has better pipe weapons all the way around. They look better, and they actually feel like a different class of gun. They're rough, slow to reload, and again, exist to be the lowest tier of guns. Now if your takeaway from this section is that the shooting is bad, or that I hate the shooting, then you weren't paying attention. Most of my criticisms in general are the things I think Bethesda should improve upon, including what I covered in this section. The shooting isn't bad, but it is mediocre, and as mentioned, it clearly isn't the saving grace it's meant to be. Sure, the shooting can be fun, but why am I doing it? For a bunch of quests and characters in a world I simply don't care about, and have no investment in? At that point, there's a little functional difference between playing Fallout 4 for the combat or loading up Gmod, spawning a bunch of Combine soldiers and shooting them. Because at the end of the day, the point is purely to shoot things. Yeah, sure, the design of the world is different and you get the dopamine rush from looting things in Fallout 4, but that's still playing to base instincts and isn't rewarding your time and investment with content of any substance. And if all you want is that dopamine rush, that's fine too. But then don't act like this game is great and amazing, when the one thing it does best is mediocre and appealing to base instincts. Back in part 1, I started off this series talking about the opening and the protagonists of this game, Nate and Nora, and the fact that Bethesda decided to give them established backstories and personalities. Now I'm going to cover some old ground here, as that discussion was over 8 hours ago now, if you're watching these videos with no breaks at all, and if you are doing that, then Jesus Christ, please take a break or something. Either way, I had more to talk about on this subject as well, which is why I'm returning to it now. As previously explained, the introductory cutscene establishes both Nate's personality and background, going so far as to explain his fears and the things he cares about, which would be fine in another setting, but doesn't quite work here. Additionally, there's clues in the house about Nora's background as well. This is a problem for a multitude of reasons. Very generally speaking, you can write two kinds of protagonists for video games, either a blank slate or an established character with a detailed backstory and personality. Now this isn't necessarily a rule, there are naturally exceptions for this, but these are the two basic ways to handle protagonists. Neither one is better or worse than the other, but they need to be utilized in the right way for them to work. Established characters are best for stories that relate to their journey and personal struggles. Usually they go through an arc and change as a person, they learn and grow, they have a set of beliefs and principles they follow, or they have some great obstacle to overcome. Blank slate protagonists, on the other hand, are best used in scenarios where the personality and beliefs of the protagonist isn't important, or in games that allow you choice. Sometimes the goal of the overall game is to tell a story about the world, and the protagonist is simply the vessel for you to experience that through. Other times, games allow you choice in deciding who you want your character to be and how you want them to act. Will you play by your own morals, or will you roleplay by creating a set of rules for yourself to play by, based on the personality you've established for your character? The problem with Fallout 4's protagonists is the fact that Bethesda tried to do both and failed miserably. It ends up being this really weird and uncomfortable middle ground that satisfies neither use in the slightest. Typically, Fallout games allow you choice in who you are and how you handle situations. Sure, there's some established details for your background in these games. It's hard to have a total blank slate that works with the world you've got established, but they at least give you the freedom to decide. With both Fallout 3 and 4, Bethesda surgically implanted a brick of C4 into this concept and blew it the f*** apart in the worst way possible. In Fallout 1, you're a vault dweller that's chosen to venture out into the dangerous wasteland to find a rare piece of technology to save the vault. Beyond that, you're free to decide who your character is, and it allows you to write your own backstory for that character. In Fallout 2, you're the tribal descendant of the protagonist from the first game, and have spent your entire life in this tribal village, until you're similarly chosen to go find a rare piece of technology to save the village. There's a bit less to work with here, but it's still fine for the most part. New Vegas handled this best out of all 5 games, with the only established details of your past in the base game being the fact that you were working as a courier prior to the start of the game, and you got shot in the head for it. As such, New Vegas allows the greatest player freedom for deciding who their character is and what their backstory is. Naturally, not everyone will enjoy that style of protagonist, but many people do. I've seen people discussing the builds and runs they've done as specialized characters, and how much they've enjoyed the game by trying to play their characters a certain way. I remember seeing a post on 4chan years ago, where a guy said he did playthroughs of New Vegas as Walter White and Judge Dredd, which honestly sounds fucking awesome. The fact a courier has no established past allows players this kind of freedom, something that Fallout 3 and 4 both lack entirely. Fallout 3 goes out of its way to establish every major detail of your life. By the time you exit the vault, you know who your father is, you know your mother is dead, you know who your best friend is, you know who your bullies are, you know who your dad's friends are, and not a single aspect of this can be changed in any way, shape, or form. No matter how you treat Amada or Butch at the birthday party and GOAT exam, by the time of escape, everyone in Vault 101 is in the same position regardless. Now outside the vault, you can choose to be a paragon of virtue, or a total fucking thundercunt, or anything in between. But by that point, you're locked into who your character is, and ultimately have no room to decide any details about them, besides how good or evil they are, through how you choose to complete quests in the game. As bad as that is, it's still light years ahead of Fallout 4, which even removes the choice aspect and the karma system entirely. In Fallout 4, you can either be a veteran soldier who fought in the war, or you could be a law school graduate, and regardless of which one you pick, your character is married to the other, and the two of them have an infant son. You can't not care about your spouse or child, because your character literally shouts the fact that they do care, and they do so repeatedly, so it immediately f***ing obliterates any potential chance for you to decide any aspects about your character, but it gets worse than that. None of this backstory for either character ends up having an impact on the actual game itself. For all intents and purposes, it might as well just not be there at all, because it's never truly utilized. Sure, the robots on the stupid ship quest can script you to help them, because you're a US citizen, but even then it seems contrived and pointless, and is a quest that could exist anyways without this forced and horrible setup. Nate and Nora's backstory is pretty much dropped and forgotten the second you leave the vault, and besides the USS Constitution quest, it's never brought up again. At least as far as I'm aware. I'm sorry if I missed some obscure piece of dialogue, but it is really more than one person can reasonably go through, and even if I did miss one or two small pieces of dialogue that reference it, that's still a far cry away from what it should be for this forced backstory to even be worth it. A common response to this criticism is to just ignore it and pretend it isn't there, or just mod it out. But if that's what you need to do in order to fix the issue of the player having a pre-established backstory, then why even include it in the first place? Probably because ML is such a hack writer that he thinks the only way to get you invested in the story is with a missing family member, as if this is something they've done 4 times at this point in the 2 Fallout games they've made. And even Fallout 76 starts off similarly, with you tracking down the Overseer. Now a lot of people might disagree with me on this aspect, and that's fine, but I don't necessarily think a Fallout protagonist with an established backstory is a bad idea. I think such a thing could work really well in the setting, and could allow players to experience the world and aspects of it in different ways when placed into the shoes of an established character, rather than a blank slate. But it's something that would have to be done right. Their backstory, personality, and so forth would have to be important to such a story, and not casually chucked into the fucking bin like they do here in Fallout 4. Think of something like a game from Telltale, but not utter dog shit. I understand the intent is for there to be urgency on finding your child, and it's important when your character cares about it, but that doesn't play so well in an open world game like this, because you quickly run into situations where players aren't going to give a shit, and instead are off gallivanting about collecting paint and returning overdue books for quests, or spending 500 hours collecting tin cans to build a settlement, which actually ends up being ML Pagliarillo's excuse for writing such a shit fucking story for this game in the first place. No, that's not an excuse for writing garbage, you fucking hack. Bethesda should have either gone all in on an established protagonist with a backstory, or they should have given players the blank slate protagonist, not this fucking worthless bastardized half-assed amalgamation of both. The story of the Institute could have been told with a character that isn't directly related to the Institute if they had tried. But then again, the story of the Institute could have also been written well, and we didn't fucking get that either. It really wouldn't be hard to have Nate and Nora's backstories actually have impact on the game either. It could have been written in such a way that Nate is more knowledgeable about combat and tactics, while Nora is more skilled at talking to people and trying to resolve conflicts peacefully. And this could even be represented in their skills. You know, if they actually fucking had any. This could even provide an interesting dichotomy in the styles of playing the games, either combat-oriented, or trying to peacefully resolve conflicts by having the 2 playable options representing each side, and this could be further expanded upon by throwing each character into situations better suited to the other, so they're out of their element. Have the Minutemen relying on Nora to formulate some kind of battle plan. Have Nate trying to resolve some kind of conflict between two groups, and both situations are made harder to achieve the optimal outcome as your character is inexperienced at the start of the game, and as an alternative, as they learn and grow and get fucking skill points, if you reach those scenarios later in the game, they're more well prepared for it. This would go a long way to making their backstories have some kind of meaning and impact upon the game, especially as they learn and grow, instead of the backstories just existing for no reason. As it stands, with what we got, there's enough here to destroy any semblance of being able to roleplay as the character you want, but there's not enough here to actually have any impact or meaning to the story. It's really annoying that Bethesda keeps trying to force these shitty, unnecessary backstories on the player character in Fallout, especially since they handle the blank slate so well in the Elder Scrolls series. In every Elder Scrolls game except Daggerfall, you start off as a prisoner, and that's the extent of it. Sure, sometimes you're involved in a prophecy, but that's just part of the game's story playing out. All the actual details about your character's life and who they are is up to you, except for the one single fact that your character was imprisoned at some point. Even if you want your character to be an absolute paragon of virtue and is disgusted by those who commit crime, the games even allow you enough room to decide that your character was wrongfully imprisoned.
Perhaps the gods have placed you here so that we may meet. As for what you have done, it does not matter. That is not what you will be remembered for.
I also want to talk about character creation a bit here. It's basically an improvement in nearly every way. There's greater options available to give unique looks to characters, such as having scars and other features, and there's also the option to change your character's physical build to a degree, a first for Bethesda games. This inherently makes it so you can make more unique looking characters than you could in previous Bethesda games, where everyone shared the exact same body type, with the only difference being male and female, texture, and sometimes extra appendages. Hopefully this is something Bethesda continues to develop and improve on for future games, as it really can be utilized for greater visual variety in the kinds of people you see in the world. I'd further like to see a height slider be added too, so you could play as anyone from the size of Mini-Me to Andre the Giant. I'd also like to see the return of the RGB sliders for hair color, as opposed to the preset ones. I have no idea why Bethesda removed this, but I dislike that they did. Now this is a topic just about everyone has criticized, though there are apparently a few defenses for it. It's generally universally accepted at this point that the dialogue system in Fallout 4 is fucking garbage in pretty much every way. In Morrowind, you basically had a list of topics you can ask a character about, and they'd give a wall of text response. People have even compared this to wiki sites, because characters exposit so much information that would be utterly inane and useless in an actual conversation. In some cases, you'd be able to select a response too. But even then, in most cases, those responses were a yes or a no. Fallout 1, 2, 3, New Vegas, Oblivion, and Skyrim all allowed you to select your responses or things you wanted to ask about from a list. It might not be the best system ever, but it worked, and it was fine. It was a case of, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. For some god-awful reason, they decided to fix it, and they made it worse. With Fallout 4, it is massively limiting on the entire rest of the game. In fact, you might even be able to argue that many story-related issues with the game might even be caused by how f***ing terrible this system is due to how grotesquely limiting it is. Due to the way this system was made, there can only ever be exactly 4 responses to any given statement by an NPC. No more, no less. Always 4. The effect of this is incredibly profound, given this is a series where character interaction has always been a massively important aspect. The result in most cases is simply not having room for certain branches of dialogue to even exist, because accounting for every pertinent topic is now impossible with just 4 branches of dialogue, most of which are likely already taken up by more immediately important or relevant lines of discussion, such as active quests. Because of this, incredibly important information to the world and scenarios we're put in just outright doesn't exist, such as literally anything regarding the Institute's super mutant department. Everyone in the Institute just pretends like it isn't there, except for one character in one quest. Otherwise, it's impossible to discuss or ask about, and this plays into what I was talking about before, with how the Institute does some really horrendous shit that just isn't even acknowledged by anyone in the game. It also restricts what little choice you have in conversations as well. Rather than the multitude of potential responses we often had in previous games, even in Fallout 3, we're limited to just the 4 Bethesda thought were most important to put into the game, and in most cases even those choices are bland as compared to what we had in previous games. And honestly, even bringing up these edge cases, as far as dialogue options go, is being incredibly generous, because in most cases your options are relegated to yes, no, sarcastic, and the fourth option is sometimes asking for more info, sometimes passing a charisma check, which in most cases doesn't actually provide you with any new information, and characters just rephrase what they're saying anyways, and in the worst situations, it's just another way of saying yes. In fact, I've even previously demonstrated how even saying no is in effect saying yes in some cases. This is fucking horrible, and everyone responsible should never have any influence over any creative work ever again. I don't care if it's a massive AAA game with a $100 million budget, or arts and crafts time in a kindergartner class. The people responsible should be fucking evicted from having influence over anything involving creativity. Choice is one of the most important aspects of the series, and this game has gutted that in the worst possible way. Fallout 4 tries to present deep themes about slavery, and what it means to be alive, as well as not trusting those around you because they might want to harm you. But it falls utterly flat because there's no deep discussions to be had about any of these topics. It doesn't commit to, or explore any of its core concepts with any amount of depth. It's all surface level at best, which is really sad for a game series that has previously gone into great detail and nuance about how aspects of its world work, or why characters act the way they do or hold certain beliefs. The previous games have handled topics of prejudice, racism, hatred, slavery, revenge, and dealing with guilt and trauma of the past, conflicting ideals that are fleshed out among many others, and they've handled them well. In Fallout 4, it comes across as a little more than a token excuse to shoot some baddies for a little while, because the deeper conversations that existed in previous games just does not exist here, nor do they even have the room to exist, and that isn't solely because of the awful dialogue system, it's because of having a voice protagonist too, which is another aspect of all this that pissed people off. Having thousands upon thousands of lines of dialogue recorded for a game is costly, so you're gonna have to pick and choose what the most important things are that you want your characters to say. And for some god-awful f***ing reason, Bethesda decided to have the protagonists be voiced, which Emil Pagliarillo himself estimates to be 40 to 50% of the voice dialogue in this game. So really, a shitty dialogue system and the voice protagonist are double-teaming Fallout to fuck it as hard as possible here. The reason this is so consequential is because it's taking up voice acting budget, both in terms of monetary cost and storage space on your computer, that could have been put to better use, such as delving into the ideas Fallout 4 is supposedly presenting, or having more meaningful outcomes to players' choices, or, you know, giving the player those choices in the first place. This also results in your choices in dialogue somehow being even more meaningless. In most cases where you can actually give responses besides yes, yes again, no which is a stand-in for yes, and sarcasm, the response you get from NPCs really only has minor changes. The first part of most responses are worded or phrased differently, but cuts back into a generic response that's given to all 4 options anyways, and sometimes you don't even get that. Sometimes it's the exact same response each time. Which leads it to some quite obnoxious interactions with NPCs, one of the most notable ones being your first encounter with Piper and Mayor McDonough.
Why don't we ask the newcomer? You support the news? Because the mayor's threatened to throw free speech in the dumpster.
This really is just like to stir up trouble.
Oh, I didn't mean to bring you into this argument, miss. No. You look like Diamond City material. Welcome to the great green jewel of the Commonwealth. Safe, happy, a fine place to come. Spend your money, settle down. Don't let this muckraker here tell you otherwise, alright?
This just comes off as fucking lazy and incredibly unsatisfying in a game that's supposed to be all about the choices you can make. But worse yet, they're wasting voice acting budget on this shit, and it all ends up being little more than flavor dialogue. It's all superficial. What's even worse is that this is all so poorly handled that it's difficult to get all the necessary information to understand situations. Back when Fallout 4 first came out, I saw many posts on different sites and even some videos criticizing the fact that Sean just dies from a mystery disease that's never explained, and only occasionally did someone say he had cancer. Here's how that part of the game plays out.
As I'm sure several of you are already aware, I have been under Dr. Volkert's care for some time. I'm sorry, this is difficult for me. Our best efforts have failed. Every experimental treatment we could devise has been unsuccessful. I'm sorry to say I am dying.
What?
Please,
Can't be serious.
everyone, please. I am sorry. This is not how I wanted to tell you, but we're running out of time.
This can't be happening. I only just found you.
I've had the same thoughts more than a few times. But we cannot let this stop us. Our work must continue. We can talk more later. Right now, the future of the Institute is at stake.
Why would you joke about this? It isn't funny.
Were it a joke, I'd agree it's in poor form. But I'm afraid it's not. We can talk more later.
There must be something we can do to help you.
The only thing that matters now is continuing the Institute's work. It will be all right. I assure you, we can talk more later.
You're dying?
I'm afraid so. A very aggressive form of cancer. Believe me when I say we've done everything we can. We can talk more later.
Only one of the dialogue options actually elaborates that it's cancer. If you don't pick the right one the first time, and don't have the foresight to save and reload your game fucking constantly to get every piece of information, you never again have the chance to find out that he dies of cancer. It will just remain a mystery disease. Even the word cancer only appears in all of his dialogue one single time. This time that can easily be missed, leading to players missing critical information due to no actual fault of their own. Additionally, the vagueness of your selection of responses not accurately showing you what your response is can often result in your character saying things you don't intend them to say. An example that bugged me on my first time playing, and Mr. Caption pointed this out in his video, is acting sarcastic with Nick after you explore Kellogg's memories. Kellogg talks through Nick for a moment, and, if you respond sarcastically, your character instead flies into a rage and challenges him to a fight.
Hey, Valentine.
Hope you got what you were looking for inside my head. I was right. I should have killed you when you were on ice.
You want to try for round 2, huh? Let's go.
What are you talking about?
Maybe Bethesda's focus on aliens in Fallout is due to them having actual aliens working for them making these games, because anyone who understands human interaction would know that aggressive belligerence and threatening to kill someone in that manner is not what sarcasm looks or sounds like. Also, Nick's reaction here is also the same for all 4 responses, like with the mayor in the previous example, and it comes off as really jarring and weird. This entire dialogue system is just a disaster on every level, and there's no good reason it should have been this way. They did it this way because they wanted to emulate how choices worked in Mass Effect and Telltale games. I can't speak to the quality of Mass Effect because I've never played it, but Telltale is a bad f***ing thing to base their game about choices on. For anyone who doesn't know, Telltale games made games that were more narrative driven, and each one started off with a screen saying your choices matter. You had time limits on how fast you could respond, and each episode had decisions that would impact the rest of the game. Except they didn't. Most choices were an illusion of choice and actually changed very little outside of some dialogue between characters. Ultimately, every major event happens regardless of your choice. And even in cases where you have to choose between people living or dying, the character that lives often ultimately ends up dying anyways later on, and having little impact on the overall story in between those points. The biggest effect your choices had was how much you got berated for not being an omniscient demigod and not picking the best solutions to each problem, even though most cases had no best option and was just a lose-lose scenario, and even then the characters still constantly berate you, especially in the games after Season 1 of Walking Dead, because the game constantly threw you in situations where most options were bad, and it felt like the game was punishing you for things out of your control. If you're the kind of person who gets off on being yelled at and demeaned, then I highly recommend Telltale Games. While I do really like the style of their games overall, and I think there's a lot of potential here, the problem is their writing was awful and had a ton of forced drama in it, and the choices never made any difference, so it actually kind of makes sense that what we got in Fallout 4 was influenced by that. Additionally, because of how limited this system is, it leads into weird conversations where the response you get simply doesn't make any sense for what you said.
I want you to head over there, wipe out everything that moves, and secure that stockpile. Understood?
Consider it done.
Look, I realize you're eager to take the fight to the Institute, but it'll have to wait. The Brotherhood cannot allow those abominations to have a nuclear arsenal at their fingertips.
Nothing here makes sense. In this playthrough, I haven't even brought up the missing Babby, or the fact I'm looking for the Institute, so how does he know? Further, I didn't say that this was a waste of time, or that I'd rather be fighting the Institute, or anything of the sort. I said, consider it done, and he goes off into a random tangent about the Institute, when that wasn't part of the conversation. This dialogue system makes interacting with characters even more obnoxious though. If a character has more than one specific thing to talk to you about, it will prioritize whatever the game thinks is most important, because it seems as though it can only run one set of conversations at a time. For example, if you have 2 quests to turn into one NPC, when you engage it will pick one, you will go through the associated dialogue, and either the NPC will end the conversation or you will be forced to, because the option to bring up the other quest simply isn't there. So the NPC will start to walk away, and you have to re-engage them in the conversation. Or, for another example, I had unlocked Hancock as a companion after completing the Big Dig for part 3 of this analysis series, but I didn't take him as a companion, so I had to talk to him for the Silver Shroud quest. The dialogue option I needed for that quest just would not appear, because what the game had prioritized as companion recruitment dialogue instead, it just never allowed me to talk about the Silver Shroud. As a result, I was forced to dismiss my current companion and take Hancock just so I could progress the quest. It should really go without saying that this is terrible design. I shouldn't be forced to take a character as a companion that I don't want in order to progress a quest when having that character as a companion is totally unnecessary, especially if I have to get rid of my current companion to do so. Because now I have to go track them down or wait for them to show up at a settlement if I want to recruit them again. What if you prefer someone else over Hancock? What if you're trying to unlock their quest? It's so unnecessary and stupid that it's designed this way. This also applies to companions. Take Nick Valentine here. Let's say I want to get him out of his power armor, or want to dismiss him as a companion.
Hey, Valentine.
How we doing on the hunt for Eddie's tapes?
Still searching for him.
Just let me know when you manage to get your hands on him.
Hey.
I'm all in. Anything I can help with?
I need you to get out of your power armor.
Sure thing.
Well, that's pretty f***ing annoying. Anytime I want to talk to him, if I haven't completed his stupid quest yet, that will always be the first interaction with him, and completing that subject ends the conversation. So I have to engage with him again. And this is a constant thing you will have to deal with until you complete his shitty quest. He will also just bring it up at complete random, regardless of whatever else you may be doing.
How we doing on the hunt for Eddie's tapes?
I'm not entirely sure, but I had trouble getting off the vertibird here, and I think it's because his dialogue to pester you about his shitty quest decided to activate at this exact moment. Also, once again, a failing of this only for, no more, no less system. If you want to ask him about your relationship with him while he's in power armor, then you have to make him get out of the power armor and re-engage him in dialogue to do so.
Something to get off your chest?
I need you to get out of your power armor.
Sure thing.
Look alive.
Do something for you?
How are we doing, Nick?
Well, I like how you've been handling things lately, if that's what you mean.
There also seems to be an issue with NPC dialogue playing. I haven't noticed a particular pattern on this, but it seems to happen pretty reliably with Preston. But basically, a character will start into a line of dialogue, but it'll be cut off randomly, and the character will just be pushed into their following block of dialogue.
You guys gonna be okay now?
Yeah, for a while anyway. We can at least move some. Listen, when we first met, you asked about the Minutemen?
It's really weird and obnoxious, but that's a common theme at this point. Speaking of obnoxious, it's an extremely common issue for the cinematic dialogue camera to clip into objects in the world or into other characters. Another issue with this system is that it will both screw you over when trying to skip dialogue and interrupt you when trying to shoot. It isn't always clear when you're in conversation mode, as it can start before you get to conversation mode camera. So sometimes when trying to skip dialogue, you might accidentally shoot the person you're trying to talk to. Other times, you might want nothing more than to shoot someone who's trying to talk to you, and if you leave the conversation and look back at them to try to shoot, the conversation will re-engage. Fallout 4 calls itself an RPG, but in reality, it's an action FPS game wearing the RPG genre tag as a skin suit, in the same way Leatherface wears a mask made out of human skin. The difference being that I'd be far more likely to trust Leatherface with my life than I would Bethesda with an RPG. Now, a lot of people tend to not take kindly to people saying their favorite RPG isn't actually an RPG. But it absolutely is worth making the distinction between what does and doesn't make an RPG. Because if we don't, then the definition of RPG will get diluted. Unfortunately, that process has been ongoing for many years now. But I love RPGs, and I believe it's worth pushing back on this simplification of what constitutes an RPG. Language is a shared understanding of definitions, and when those definitions are at odds, then it becomes harder for us to understand each other. A good example of this happening is with the word literally, where it is often used as an exaggeration or for hyperbole, so it's no longer serving its actual definition. That movie dragged on and on. It was literally 5 hours long. No, it just felt like it was that long. But it wasn't literally 5 hours long, because the definition of literal is taking words at their exact meaning. Saying a movie is literally 5 hours long means the movie is 5 hours long. So being on the same page as to what RPG even means is important to the discussion, especially when we have people who exist who believe all games are inherently role-playing games because you're playing a character in a game. Max Payne is a role-playing game because you're playing the role of Max Payne. Hopefully you can see why this particular discussion is so messy, and why we now have to trudge through a discussion on what even constitutes an RPG, before I even get to discussing Fallout 4's RPG mechanics, or lack thereof, and their shallowness. So what makes an RPG exactly? Is it an experience and leveling system? Then Call of Duty and 7 Days to Die, and any other game with a leveling system for progression, are RPGs. Is it taking on the role of a character and playing as that character? Then every game is an RPG and the phrase is meaningless. Is it a game in which your character is a blank slate for you to create your own character to play as? Then not only is Fallout 4 not an RPG by that standard, but then games like Minecraft are. Any game that doesn't give you a backstory would be. Is it choice? Then Telltale games are RPGs, as are BioShock, and any other game that has any form of significant choice. Part of the problem is that what RPG means can be a bit nebulous as it is, because what makes an RPG isn't an exact set of criteria that every RPG has to adhere to, but more so a set of profile points, as well as their emphasis or function. For example, Minecraft has experience, a leveling system, and a blank slate character that allows freedom to roleplay, while it lacks perks, skills, and so forth. So could it be classified as an RPG, even if its RPG elements are rather weak? Well, no, because the leveling system is neither a core focus of the game, nor is it directly related to your character progression. In fact, there is no character progression in Minecraft. You will never get stronger or faster, nor will your health or stamina permanently increase. Leveling is used purely to enchant your equipment. Conversely, Knights of the Old Republic also has an experience and leveling system, as well as perks and choice, but not a blank slate character, and much of the focus of the gameplay and story is upon your choices, as well as the core RPG mechanics, and this is a game that very few would contest being called an RPG. It's this nebulous nature of what makes an RPG, combined with the fact that RPG mechanics are just really good for character progression in terms of gameplay, that causes issue in defining a game as an RPG or not, especially when that game is in a long-running, well-known RPG series, and only provides token RPG mechanics in order to keep a death grip on the idea that it's still an RPG. However, there is absolutely a line in the sand to be crossed, where the stripping out and dumbing down of RPG mechanics results in a game no longer being classified as an RPG. Unfortunately, that's not what happened with Fallout 4 and Skyrim. Instead, something else happened. Instead, Bethesda continues to insist that these games are RPGs, and their die-hard fans will ardently champion this cause when these games are pseudo-RPGs at absolute best. I'd argue what makes an RPG is the emphasis or focus on the core RPG mechanics, in particular, skills, attributes, and a leveling system. Are the RPG mechanics an intrinsic part of the game, or are they a means to an end? Is half the point of playing the game getting involved with the RPG mechanics in the first place, or are they something you simply have to deal with in order to progress your character, to get higher stats, do more damage, get special bonuses, and so forth? Let's take a look at a couple of games to hammer this point home. Morrowind, New Vegas, and 7 Days to Die. All three of these games have an experience system to level you up, though it works slightly differently in Morrowind. Skills that affect your ability to do things within the world, attributes, and in all three games you play as a blank slate character, with little to no prior established backstory, aside from the bare minimum necessary for your character to exist within the world. Additionally, New Vegas and 7 Days both have perks, so surely 7 Days is an RPG, right? Well, I think you'll be hard-pressed to find many people who will argue that 7 Days is an RPG, despite sharing many core elements with the other two games, which are unquestionably RPGs. Well, as I said, the emphasis and focus on the mechanics is the key here. Starting off with Morrowind, it's got leveling, attributes, and skills. You're a blank slate character, and there's a minimal amount of choice. First and foremost, the attributes and skills are an essential part of the game, where having a low skill makes you utterly incompetent, and having a high skill represents expertise or even mastery, and this is across the board. Lockpicking, using weapons, and casting spells, for example, are almost certainly going to result in failure with low levels in the skill. However, each action increases in success as the relevant skills increase. Further, your attributes and skills are core to progressing in factions, where if you're not skilled enough in the area a faction focuses on, they will deny you advancing in ranks. As for the blank slate, the game handles this masterfully, where pretty much every element of your backstory and character is open for you to decide, going so far as to leave aspects of your previous incarnation open-ended, or even whether you are an incarnation, or simply a tool being used by a god. Finally is choice, which is fairly weak as it isn't a core part of the game, but what few choices you have do matter, largely in relation to factions, where you could get locked out of joining certain factions by joining opposing factions or doing jobs for said faction. Next we have New Vegas, which has got experience and leveling, attributes in the form of special, skills, perks, traits, and mostly blank slate character and choice. All of these aspects are core to the game, to the point that New Vegas wouldn't be New Vegas if even one of these were missing. Again, starting with skills and special, they're not only core to character progression, but they're vital to making your way through this world, especially in regards to the choices you make. There are literally hundreds of skill checks within the game, and even some special checks that allow you to discover key information, talk your way through situations, change the stakes, leverage your knowledge and experience to your advantage, solve problems easier, and even bully your way to your goals. And this is further increased by options given by perks. Removing skills alone from this game would have dire consequences upon your ability to interact with the world and achieving whatever goals you may have. Traits you pick at the start of the game, and a DLC adds a second chance to pick them, but at their core, traits are something that can change the way you play the game, as they grant a significant bonus at the cost of a significant detriment to your character. Perks are chosen every 2 levels, and similarly, can change how you play the game by granting you new abilities and options to interact with the world. Aside from what's added in a DLC, the blank slate nature of the courier allows you to project yourself onto the character, or create a character for role-playing purposes, with little to no story established for you, aside from the fact you're working as a courier at the time you're captured and shot by Benny. As for choice, I gave some examples through skills, but not only are they options to interact with the world, but most importantly, your choices have consequences upon the characters and world. The actions you take don't exist within a bubble, but have long-lasting effects. Finally, we have 7 Days to Die, which has experience, leveling, attributes, 2 different kinds of skills, perks, and a blank slate character. Here, skills and attributes are used purely for character progression. While each level of the attributes will increase your ability in some way, they largely act as a barrier or a level gate to raising certain skills. It's essentially done this way so you can't really rush any particular build. The skills you raise directly through leveling and gaining skill points are things that increase your ability in most ways, such as simply doing more damage with weapons. Most of these skills have 1 to 5 levels, as opposed to the 1 to 100 levels of Morrowind and New Vegas. Rather than incrementally increasing your ability, they're more large jumps in proficiency. The other kinds of skills are gained through magazines randomly found in the world. This acts purely as a level gate for crafting weapons, so you can't just rush maxing out a skill and building the best weapons. You have to start at the bottom with pipe shotguns, for example, and working your way up. Perks are also found randomly in books, and while they do make the game easier, they aren't super necessary. And you also have a blank slate character here. Now the differences between these 3 games should be obvious, and don't get me wrong, I love the fuck out of 7 Days to Die, but it simply isn't an RPG. It uses mechanics common with RPGs, but it isn't one of the main focuses of the game. It's a means to an end, because a leveling and skill system are simply useful for character progression in a game, especially for a game that is constantly ramping the difficulty up. The point of 7 Days to Die isn't to engage with its skill system, but to kill zombies, and build bases, and getting spooked. That said, 7 Days to Die is still in development, and it does absolutely have the potential to become an RPG, but as it stands right now at the time of making this video, it isn't one. Now before I get to Fallout 4 itself, it's worth taking a brief look at some of Bethesda's history with their games to show the gradual decline of its RPG mechanics, and how there's been less focus on them over time. I've already covered Morrowind, so I'll skip that. I've been following Bethesda since Morrowind, and for a long time they were my favorite game company. However, over the years I've noticed a steady downward trend in the quality of their games. Though I can't speak to what came before Morrowind, I do know that since Morrowind, their games have been increasingly simplified and made worse in many ways. Oblivion was still a pretty good game, even if NPC dialogue was fucking weird, but it still wasn't quite as good as Morrowind, and it went a long way to simplifying the skill system, and maybe worst of all, it added the quest marker, which has become a plague upon Bethesda's game design ever since. Fallout 3 is where things really took a turn for the worse, with an incredibly poorly written story, awful world building, and for the most part, it comes across as a bad rehash of the original games. But it did still have RPG mechanics to an extent. Fallout 3 lacked the trait system of the original games, but it still had skills, perks, special, and even karma, though many of the perks were little more than skill boosts. The real hit to the RPG mechanics came with Skyrim. I'm going to divert to talk about this for a bit because I feel it's relevant to this discussion. The Elder Scrolls series had a number of character building aspects that appeared in each game, though they differed from Fallout. Elder Scrolls had skills, attributes, birth signs, classes, and racial abilities, with the attributes being their equivalent of special, though on a scale from 1 to 100 instead of 1 to 10. And birth signs were just a special boost or ability to your character in some way. Classes were a set of skill that you got a bonus to, and using and leveling those skills is what increased your overall level. Skyrim removed attributes entirely, reducing the choice in leveling up simply to which color bar you want to increase, the red one, the blue one, or the green one. It took a lot of thought and consideration out of your character build, and dumbed it down to the most basic form it could take. It also removed birth signs and classes as an aspect of your character that's locked in from the start of the game. Instead, you could visit runestones that would provide you with a semi-permanent buff based on that sign that was only removed if you received a bonus from a different runestone. And for classes, it didn't matter which skill you used anymore. All of them would level you up. You became a jack of all trades, and the worst part is, at least when it comes to combat, you were good at everything. Attributes were important to character builds as they had impact on your character's overall performance. For example, this is what the formula looked like in Morrowind for making potions. It took into account the relevant attribute, intellect, luck, as well as your alchemy skill. So in effect, if you were extremely talented with alchemy, but your character is incredibly stupid, that would have an impact on your ability to create potions, and the quality they would result in. This is just one example. The attributes determined resistances, your health, and a bunch of other things as well. It was a core component of your character build. Skyrim stripped that out completely, and just replaced it with the 3 bars I mentioned earlier. This is a clear example of Bethesda unnecessarily dumbing down and stripping out the mechanics of their games. Now, prior to Fallout 4's launch, I was slightly optimistic, because the way I saw it, skills were too important to how an RPG like this functions for them to remove it, and the special system was far too iconic for them to remove, like they did with attributes in Skyrim.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
Little did I know that was only the tip of the iceberg, and the true horror hadn't begun yet. Skills, perks, and special form something of a symbiotic relationship in these games. When one is missing, it presents issues. In this case, skills being removed had a dire impact on character progression and dialogue. Skills are a measure of how effective your character is with particular actions that you take in the world, with the easiest example being lockpicking. In Fallout 3 and New Vegas, raising your lockpicking skill allowed you to attempt more difficult locks, and made lower level ones easier to open. Upon leveling up, you're awarded skill points, and you decide how you want to spend them. It was an important aspect of building your character, especially since these games had a level cap, and you wouldn't be able to realistically max out every single skill, unless it was something you were actually optimizing for, and especially during the lower levels, it could be important where you allocate skill points, as if you decide to rush a particular skill, such as lockpicking, then you'd be less effective in other important areas, such as any of the combat skills. It's a fairly straightforward system that should be very easy to understand. The higher your skill level, the more effective you are. With skills being gutted from the game entirely, this left the perk system to do the heavy lifting that the skills used to do. Perks used to be cool bonuses, abilities, or sometimes even effects that can change the way you play the game. There were some boring ones, such as straight skill increases, but those were mostly in Fallout 3. In the other games, there were also ones that made the wildlife neutral to you, or ones that summoned a mysterious man in vats to assist you in killing someone, or perform a killing move on a sleeping character. With skills gone, you now had to spend perks to replace their function. Want to pick a higher level of lock? You need to spend a perk for it. Want to increase your damage with certain types of weapons? You need a perk for it. Now, while some of the more interesting perks do still exist in the game, you now have to choose between that, or picking one that fills the missing space from skills being removed. Spending a perk point was no longer a matter of picking something you thought was fun, or interesting, or even for a neat bonus. It now became a matter of deciding which perk you needed most, for whatever reason. As a result, this likely meant that most character builds would end up being very similar. If you wanted to build a character that was highly experienced in non-combat skills, such as science, medicine, speech, and so forth, yet not so great at combat, that's simply not really an option anymore. Fallout 4 is a game where about 95% of its conflicts and issues are solved by just shooting things, so the perks that increase your ability, accuracy, and damage when shooting things become a must. Another problem here is that perks are level gated, meaning you can't rush specialization in any aspect of your character build. In previous games, you could dump all of your skill points into a single skill at the cost of everything else going underdeveloped. But with level gating, that's no longer possible. Want to pick a Master Lock at level 5? Too fucking bad. You need to be level 18 to get that perk. Come back later when you reach that level. In prior games, many perks did have a skill, special, or level requirement, but that was also when perks weren't an absolute essential for your character build. Now that perks have to make up for the lack of skills, the arbitrary level gating further reduces your ability to build your character as you please. It almost comes across as Bethesda being overly handholdy, that they feel they must do everything in their power to prevent players from accidentally making overly bad builds, or supremely overpowered builds, but this ultimately takes more freedom and choice away from the player. The removal of skills has the additional downside of removing certain solutions and paths of discussion that existed in previous games. There's still speech checks, but they're based entirely off your charisma, rather than speech and charisma, or what level the relevant skill was in discussion. There are also skill checks for performing certain actions and solving quests, and there's only one case in the entire game I found where there was something similar, and that was the USS Constitution quest, which can fuck off. This is yet another aspect of New Vegas that added a lot of depth to the game, where certain paths became available or were locked off based on how much your character knew in a particular subject, and it placed greater emphasis on the fact that your character build does matter. The removal of skills outright destroys the many interesting and specialized ways of progressing or completing quests or resolving conflicts and all the associated dialogue, and the result is Fallout 4 feeling that much more bland in comparison. In New Vegas, there are dozens upon dozens of skill checks throughout the world that allowed you to call people's bluffs, or gain access to locations, or pass security checkpoints, or even just get paid more. But such confrontations and encounters cannot exist within Fallout 4, where everything is a straight charisma check, and again, even most of those don't really provide any new information or differing paths, just alternate ways of saying the same things the characters would have said otherwise, or just asking for more caps. This also makes even attempting a build that doesn't focus on combat entirely pointless, as there's no benefit for being knowledgeable in any particular field beyond basic gameplay changes. How much you know about medicine or science or explosives or survival or repair or whatever else will never come up. Your character being knowledgeable will never factor into any situation or confrontation because there is nothing for your character to learn. They already know everything they need to by default, and all you get is the ability to smooth talk your way past any charisma checks and solving most conflicts by shoving as many bullets as you can into anything that moves. As for perks, this time around Bethesda decided to do some gimmicky bullshit, rather than the system that worked before, which is a running theme at this point. Bethesda likes to self-fillet about Fallout 4 having something like 270 perks, but in all reality there's a grand total of 70 perks that you can pick upon leveling up. Many of them have multiple levels to each perk that increase their effectiveness. Each special attribute has 10 base perks, and they're limited to 10, and only 10 each, because for some awful reason, Bethesda decided to order them into this infantile perk poster as if they think their audience is a bunch of 5-year-old kids. This is stupid and makes no sense, because it is limiting how many unique perks could be added to the game, and this causes further issues down the line with DLC. They also have harder level requirements now, because as explained, perks do the heavy lifting and boring number work that skills once did. So now you can no longer rush being proficient in a particular field at the expense of everything else. This is a bad choice in how to build your character, because it limits the way you can decide to play the game, as if that aspect wasn't bad enough by turning into a shooter, where 95% of the problems in the game are solved by mowing down enemies with a gun. There's very little reason to deviate from builds that focus on perks important to combat, such as damage bonuses, to instead go for perks you might find interesting for whatever reason. As for the DLC perks, in Fallout 3 and New Vegas, additional perks were added to the level up menu with the DLCs, but because there's this hard limit here, no additional perks can be added in this way. Instead, they've got to be obtained in other ways. For example, Nuka World adds in an entire 7 perks, one of which is a companion perk, 1 is obtained through magazines, 3 are based on which factions align with you at the end, 1 is a hidden perk to prevent damage to yourself from certain grenades, and 1 is given to you when you establish settlements for the raiders, as opposed to Honest Hearts, which gives you a total of 9 new perks, 3 of which are companion perks, and the remaining 6 are all perks that can be chosen when you level up. The expansions for Fallout 3 New Vegas added additional perk options to the existing list you can choose from, whereas with Fallout 4's expansions, perks are given to you mostly as rewards for quests or in perk books. A core aspect of building your character with expansion content is now no longer a choice, but a reward thrust upon you whether you like it or not. Which conveniently brings me to the next part of the subject. Skill books go all the way back to Fallout 1 as an item you can get in the game. With the skills removed, this idea had to be changed, and to replace it, we got perk books, or magazines instead. I don't necessarily think this is a bad idea, but it is absolutely not a replacement for the skill system either. These perk books can add any number of benefits to your character, from certain types of damage increases or resistances to other stat boosting effects, like improved sneak. There's some that add minigames, some that add tattoos, some that add new hacking abilities, some that add additional power armor paint jobs, and some that add additional items to build in settlements. But overall, these feel lackluster on their own. It's not so exciting to find a skill book that gives you a 5% damage increase to ghouls, or whatever else, as most people wouldn't even notice the difference during gameplay. Sure, it's a nice bonus, but it would be cool if it added new abilities such as the terminal hacking books, of which there's only 3. They tried to give some more creative uses for them, such as the one that adds settlement items to build or power armor paint jobs, but there's only a few of these in the game anyways, so it comes off as kinda cheap and pointless, especially when they could have used this to hide a lot of neat and unique customization options. I dislike tattoos myself, I think they're gaudy, but there's a lot of people who do like them. So why is there only 5 available to be found in the game? There's some that were cut, but I don't really understand why? Why go through the effort of designing these magazines to work this way, and only implement it less than half a dozen times on each alternate non-perk set of books? Why aren't there more that unlock new items to build in settlements? Why aren't there more paint jobs? Unless this was part of their plan all along. This is also a relatively minor point, but it's something of a pet peeve of mine, and that's the fact that there's one book in particular that's sort of hidden away that marks Diamond City on your map. That's all it does. Even though learning the location of Diamond City is one of the first things that happens if you're following the first stages of the main story, which most players would, and even if they didn't, this book is sort of hidden away, so few players that would find this would actually benefit from it, as it requires ignoring the main story, not knowing where Diamond City is at all, and stumbling across this book. I suppose there's nothing technically wrong with it, it doesn't break the world, it doesn't hurt anything. I just don't understand why this useless item exists for basically no reason. It's also worth mentioning that traits also did not make a return with Fallout 4. Traits are an additional character building element that you only get to pick at the start of the game. They modify certain aspects of gameplay by granting both a benefit and a penalty to your character. For example, Built to Destroy gives you a 3% bonus to your critical hit chance, but the cost is your weapons degrade 15% faster. Or Four Eyes, which grants a bonus of 2 perception when wearing glasses, but the cost is -1 perception if you're not wearing glasses. Heavy-handed causes your melee and unarmed attacks to do 20% more damage, but melee and unarmed do 60% less critical damage. Small Frame grants you 1 extra agility point at the cost of 25% extra limb damage. It's a trade-off for gaining a bonus at the cost of a detriment, and while I only rarely use traits myself while playing, it's definitely an aspect of the game that players enjoyed, and was totally optional for those who didn't, and I don't see why this aspect was removed. Fallout 3 lacked this as well for some reason. If I had to assume, my guess would be that Bethesda just has no faith in their audience, and thinks the people who play their games are drooling morons, so their solution is to overly simplify their games to the nth degree, so no one gets confused by what skills or traits do, even though it's already very simple and straightforward. As far as I could tell, there was no good reason to remove traits. It's just another game mechanic, an aspect of character building that was senselessly murdered and left in a ditch, much like Karma and Reputation. Karma is kind of a weird one to nail down, and it's probably removed for that reason. The problem with Karma is that it acts as an ever-present invisible force that determines what actions are objectively good or evil. But the problem with that is everyone is going to have a different opinion on what is good or evil. Some people consider killing another human to be bad, under any circumstances, even if the person being killed is a serial killer or mass murderer, so gaining karma upon killing such people might be annoying or frustrating to some people. In other cases, it seems inconsistent in the fact that you can gain karma for killing an evil person, but lose karma for stealing from them. Worse yet, sometimes even the games themselves would miscategorize characters, such as Roy Phillips, who commits a mass killing of a large group of people, most of whom are totally innocent of any wrongdoing, and he's listed as having very good karma. While the system isn't perfect, and probably never would be, I still think it added a necessary aspect to the game in regards to the weight each choice has, though it kinda makes sense that karma was removed, since there's barely any choice in Fallout 4 for it to really matter anyways. Karma was handled fairly well in New Vegas, by not being the most important consequence for your choices, but it still played out in the ending for each of the 4 major factions, each of them having good, neutral, and evil karma endings, each with their own implications based on your karma. Reputation was the real game changer with New Vegas, as it determined which factions tolerated, liked, or hated you based on your actions towards them. Fallout 1 and 2 had Reputation as well, but it didn't play quite as big a role as it did in New Vegas. In Fallout 3 and 4, you can murder people all willy-nilly, as long as they weren't essential that is, and while it would turn an entire town hostile, it would only last for a few days at most before they forgot about it and treated you like nothing happened. With Reputation in New Vegas, your actions had long-lasting consequences. If you murdered a bunch of NCR troopers, the faction would remember that and remain hostile to you in future encounters, and would even send hit squads after you, unless you did something to earn their favor again. It went a long way to making the world feel more like a real place, and not just an amusement park or a playground, which is what Bethesda Fallout games ultimately feel like. If anything, this is a system that should have been expanded upon, because if utilized right, it could add a lot more depth and nuance to your choices, more so than even New Vegas had. For instance, the more a faction likes you, maybe the more discounts you get from their merchants, and further, maybe interesting or powerful equipment could be locked behind those merchants, or maybe special quest lines were locked behind the higher tiers of faction reputation. This is the kind of thing that would add a lot of replayability to the game. Instead, Bethesda decided to strip out this aspect entirely again. As a result, there is little to no long-term consequences for shooting up a town, which is stupid, and there's no real dynamic between your relationship with the factions of this game. Again, this could be because they are so shallow and simplistic, but that's still a result of Bethesda failing so hard with these factions. The closest this game gets to a reputation system is that you can become permanently hostile with the Brotherhood, Institute, and Railroad, which is a simple binary of do they hate me or not, which isn't a reputation system. It's the barest acknowledgement that maybe a faction should hate you forever if you do them serious harm. Let's talk about the music. Starting off with the radio, here's my first experience with Fallout 4's radio.
I'll have reached the goal I'm dreaming of, believe me.
Yeah, the first thing I heard was a song I'd heard 1,000 times in Fallout 3. That's a great first impression. Honestly, I don't know why they felt the need to include most of the same songs from Fallout 3. Many people who played that game who did use the radio have likely heard those songs hundreds of times by now, so including them here just seems a bit silly to me. Honestly, I think Mr. Caption's idea from his No Tods, No Masters video would have worked really well, where the songs from Fallout 3 can instead be found throughout the world as collectibles, similar to how the magazines work, and if you wanted, you could give them to the radio host and they would get added into the rotation of available songs. And we know this is something Bethesda has the ability to do, because they had 3 songs specifically made for this game after you visit the singer in the third rail. Overall, there are 37 songs on the Diamond City radio, as compared to the 20 that were on Galaxy News Radio in Fallout 3, and the 2 radio stations share 12 of those songs, which is about a third of the total songs on Diamond City Radio. By nearly doubling the track list, this at least means you have more of a chance of hearing different tracks more often than the same few over and over again. Because let's be honest, the radio in Fallout 3 did get repetitive fairly quickly, and I don't think I need to reference Johnny Guitar from New Vegas either. With the budget Bethesda has, I don't understand why they can't have more songs than this, to simply further increase the pool of available songs and extend the lifespan of the radio that much further. Obviously this varies from person to person, but it can get tiring for a lot of people to hear the same songs on infinite loop. Except maybe for the people who listen to top 40 radio stations in real life, but those people are psychos anyways. I can understand including Maybe, and I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire by the Ink Spots, as they were the songs used in the opening cinematics of Fallout 1 and 3 respectively, but they include most of the tracks from Galaxy News Radio, and they also leave out Kiss to Build a Dream On, which was a song in Fallout 2's opening cinematic, as well as Blue Moon from New Vegas. Honestly, that would be a nice way to have a small nod at the history of the series too. Include the opening songs from previous games on each radio going forward. But Bethesda kind of fucked that up by not having an opening song for Fallout 4. But this might end up being a good thing because Fallout 4 deserves to be forgotten about. Another problem I have with the track list is how many songs seem to be self-referential, in the sense they seem to be about nukes and Fallout and stuff relating to them and the apocalypse. Again, this is something Caption covered, but this is a near-complete analysis, so I'm covering it as well. The tracks are Atom Bomb Baby, Crawl Out Through the Fallout, I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire, Rocket 69, The End of the World, Uranium Fever, and Uranium Rock, which is 7 tracks out of the total of 37, or close to 20% of the songs on Diamond City Radio, with the addition of Civilization mentioning Atom Bomb in the lyrics. 1 or 2 such songs would be fine, but having several songs like this in a post-nuclear apocalypse game, where everything is already related to nukes and radiation, makes the world feel that much more artificial. It makes it feel as though the only important aspect about Fallout is the fact that the nuke's dropped, and it makes it feel like a theme park. Like, imagine if there was a big game release about traveling through space and exploring new worlds, but the in-game radio included a whole bunch of tracks like Space Oddity or Starman by David Bowie, Space Truckin' by Deep Purple, or Supersonic Rocket Ship by The Kinks. It would feel less like a real world that's being portrayed, and more like a cartoon, as if the only thing people made songs about in a space setting was space and spaceships and laser guns and other sci-fi stuff, and that's the issue here. A couple songs make sense, and it's far less of an issue, but with this many it makes it feel as though a group of stuffy corporate suits sat down at a table, looked at Fallout, and their only takeaway was that it was about nukes and dictated 20% of the track list had to be related to that in some way. It's not clever, it's just really dumb, and personally, it always brought me out of the experience. However, there is some good news here. There are 5 additional songs that are created by characters within the world, which is a really good thing. It goes to show that on some level, the world isn't stagnating, and that people really are creating new things in some way. I do wish that aspect went deeper than a few songs, but I'll take what I can get. Seriously, genuinely, please do more of this in the future, Bethesda. I don't even care if it's songs I don't personally like. Doing little things like this is a good way to show that people are making new things and the world is rebuilding in some way. That it's not stagnating. That it's not the same empty, dead wasteland for 200 years. Also, you know, show the world to be rebuilding in other ways, please? Beyond just the radio, the game has its own soundtrack that is a bit of a departure from older games in the series. In Fallout 1, much of the soundtrack was less proper music, and instead more ambient sounds of the world. The haunting echoes of sirens from a dead world. It was a very grim and dour soundtrack, and it fit the tone of the game. With Fallout 4, they decided to try something a bit different, and it's generally fairly decent. At least from the times the soundtrack has actually stood out to me, with the exception of the combat music. In a first I've seen from Bethesda, they tied themes to specific locations. Prior to this, they had a general soundtrack that would play tracks randomly, and starting with Oblivion, they had a separate set of tracks specifically for dungeons. In Fallout 4, locations such as Diamond City and the Institute have their own unique tracks, and it's a nice little way to kind of make them pop out a bit more as memorable locations. Though personally, I do really hate the Institute theme, as it largely comes across as a very generic and repetitive sci-fi theme, and it drives me fucking insane. It is a good thing that they do have their own theme. That said, if a location has a unique theme, it would probably be best to have 2 or 3, just to keep some variety if it's somewhere that you'll spend a lot of time in, so you're not hearing just this one single track every time you're in Diamond City or the Institute. As for Diamond City's theme, I actually quite like it. It starts off with sort of a slow pace and sad tone, but then it starts feeling more hopeful, and eventually building into a more homey feeling, and I do think it works really well for the kind of location Diamond City is trying to portray. It's genuinely really good, and after listening to it again for the sake of working on the script, it might actually be my favorite thing about this game. On the other side of this, however, most of the combat music felt pretty samey to me. Like, none of it stood out as being unique, and it all sounded generic to the point I thought there was only one track for a while, and I just feel as though they all blend together to the point I genuinely can't tell one track from another. It's also a bit jarring when the combat music suddenly transitions into ending once you've killed all the active enemies. Part of the issue here is that oftentimes the regular combat music will fade out, then this ending portion will come in, and it just feels pointless and at times overbearing. I don't find these tracks particularly memorable either, and that may largely be due to how samey they are. Now with the selection of music I just played for you, it sounds like I'm skipping around in one track, rather than playing clips from 6 different tracks. That's how similar much of the music in this game sounds. This also applies to many of the other tracks too for non-combat, as I had a lot of issue trying to find the Diamond City theme again. Now if I had to guess how many tracks there are for combat, I'd have probably said there would be at least 5, even though it only ever sounded like 1 to me. I was shocked to learn that there's at least 15, since not a single one stood out to me. Plenty of other games have great and varied soundtracks, where even music tracks trying to portray similar emotions or feelings manage to make unique and distinct tracks from one another, so they stand out as their own thing, rather than what Fallout 4 does with much of its original soundtrack, where most of the combat themes blend together, and many of the exploration or town location themes also blend together, and it becomes hard to tell one from the next. Now this next part is less of a criticism and more of a suggestion for the future. Not that I think anyone from Bethesda will ever watch this or listen to me, but I think these Bethesda games could really benefit from including situational music, in which specific tracks play during specific moments in the story, such as a dramatic theme playing in a confrontation that hasn't evolved to combat yet, or sad music when a character is dying.
Hello, Sean.
Ah, there you are. I've already heard the news. But of course you wouldn't be here if it weren't a success. I'm glad it worked, but I'm glad you're safe.
We're all safe now.
For now, yes.
There's gotta be something more we can do for you.
No, this is what I want. It's all right. Don't worry about me. You need to look ahead. Focus on the future. Our time together has been strange, hasn't it? I spent years wondering what you were like. Thinking about all we missed out on. I want you to know that I'm grateful for the time we've had.
Now, while I'll never argue that good emotional music will improve an otherwise poorly written scene, it does absolutely help for decently written scenes, or even well-written scenes. Something like this could add a lot more impact to certain scenes within the games. This might be a bit difficult for Bethesda to implement, simply due to how their games work, because you'll end up in situations where the proper music begins playing for a scene, but if the player is fucking around and not taking it seriously, that might become a bit comical or even glitch the music out. However, if played straight by the player, it could end up being a bit more impactful. I don't actually expect Bethesda to do this, but it is something I'd like to see for the future. Music can be a powerful tool if used well, and I don't know why Bethesda hasn't attempted to use it more often to evoke feelings from players, be it a more emotional scene or sad scene, to a tense confrontation to an intense battle, or so on and so forth. Settlement building is a mechanic introduced to the series with Fallout 4, and I'm not sure they could have handled it more poorly or lazily if they tried. I'll say up front that I actually really do like these kinds of mechanics in games, and while many people might disagree with me on this, I do like the idea of being able to build settlements in Fallout. My natural stipulation would be that it would have to be done really fucking well, and that's not what we got here. Settlement building feels like a feature that was tacked on at the last minute, and never properly developed. There's such a plethora of issues I'm not really sure where to start. While you are forced to use the settlement building system for several quests, such as rebuilding Liberty Prime or building the teleporter, it never comes across as a mechanic that is actually necessary to playing the game, and I don't mean that in the sense that you can complete Fallout 1 or 2 without ever firing a gun. What I mean is that anytime settlement building is a part of a quest, it feels like it's a forced addition to either make you interact with the system, or to justify its own existence in the first place. It never comes across as an organic part of the world in the way building does in Valheim or 7 Days to Die, or other such games, and it never feels like they created any kind of interesting challenges or obstacles that could be dealt with in creative ways using this system. The best we get is clearing some rubble to unlock an area for a quest. It feels like a system lifted from an entirely different game and shoved into Fallout 4. Imagine if the driving mechanics from Grand Theft Auto 5 or Saints Row 2 were placed into this game with a drivable car, and how absolutely out of place that would feel. That's essentially what we get with settlement building. As mentioned, the justification for using it in quests is really weak too. Every time it comes up in a quest, it's used for something that can just as easily be explained as having been done by an NPC, and only ever comes across as pointless busy work instead of anything with substance. Remove the rubble, build the things for Liberty Prime, build these people a bed, add some defense to this settlement. For what should be a vital aspect of gameplay that should allow many unique and interesting and creative solutions to problems, it comes across as nothing more than trend chasing at its most shallow levels. Rather than giving you anything interesting to do, it gives you the most basic bare-bones objectives. Worst of all, many choices with the system as a whole, as well as each individual settlement, come across as arbitrary, and often pointlessly limiting, irritating, or frustrating. Moving right along, many settlement locations are too small or have weird borders, so it makes trying to work within them a pain in the ass, and just about all of them have objects you can't remove under any circumstances, which can greatly limit your ability to build, especially when some of them don't even match the sizes of objects you can build, and they don't do much. Why can't I remove the foundation of this burned out house? It just gets in the way of being able to build what I want, and I can't do much with it. Why can't I remove all this shit that takes up a big deal of what little space I have? Look at this building that is on the border of this construction zone with an inaccessible front door. What the hell am I supposed to do with this? Why the fuck can I not remove this entire skeleton? What the hell? Oh look, I removed most of this fencing, but that one piece is on the other side of the border, it looks awful, and I guess I can't get rid of it, and now it's just kind of there, forever. There's plenty examples of this too. While I don't doubt people can and have found creative ways to use such things, it comes across as unnecessarily limiting as to what you can do with these locations. I also don't understand why the ability simply just does not exist to repair existing structures. Sure, you're not going to make the homes in Sanctuary look the way they did before the bombs dropped, but anything would be better than just leaving them as these ugly skeletized remains with holes in the walls and roof. Especially when Preston and his merry crew of obnoxious morons feel the need to constantly hammer on these buildings to absolutely no effect at all.
No time to lay about. This place ain't gonna fix itself.
You can establish trade lines between settlements, so any resources in the workshop can be shared between them, which also helps for building. But that requires a perk with at least 6 charisma, so if you didn't invest in charisma from the start, you're fucked for several levels until you waste enough perks raising your charisma to reach that point, but then good luck increasing your damage or healing, asshole. This is an issue that could have been solved by a new skill existing, but skills as a whole were removed. This system, along with the crafting and modification system, gives new life to every random object in the world. As far as I'm aware, any random junk item, except for folders for some reason, can be scrapped for parts to use in something else. But this kind of raises a problem with the already twice burdened carry weight you have. I suppose this would vary from player to player, but oftentimes while playing these games, my inventory is stacked to the limit or close to it. So hauling all this extra junk you wouldn't have otherwise is now something you have to factor in. There is the convenient option to track certain components of your choice, though only if you're lacking them, and you could see items that contain such components when looking at them. But it still doesn't change the fact you're going to need a great deal of these components, especially if you use the crafting and modification system too. Well, the idea of collecting resources is good in theory. If it's something you're invested in, it turns Fallout into a garbage collecting simulator as you tear apart every dungeon you lay your eyes on for screws and adhesive and other rare materials. That's not necessarily a bad thing either. The problem is a combination of how shallow the system is, as well as how worthless the rest of the game is. Yeah, I know I keep relating everything back to story, but it's true. Story is important in a story-driven RPG. If the main point of the game, the story, is garbage, and if the RPG mechanics are overly simplified, and the combat is mediocre, then what does this game have left? Settlement building, which itself is very shallow too. But also, why would I spend time using a mediocre settlement building system with no point or purpose for nothing more than making and decorating my own little ant farms in a game where the world and story fail to make me care, and where 98% of my settlement NPCs are generic randos with no name? I could see playing this game purely for settlement building and ignoring the story, if at least the settlement building system was really well designed, or even getting invested in a mediocre settlement system if the story was really good, and if settlement building had a big effect on the game and world. But it doesn't. The benefit of using the system to the player is purely generating a minimal amount of junk that could be used for crafting and modding, or generating caps and useful and valuable items to sell like water. Speaking of, it's also quite amusing to note the fact that Fallout 1 and 3 were all about a dire lack of water, and Fallout 2 is about a dire lack of food, yet none of that is an issue at all in Fallout 4, due to the settlement building feature. The water purifier that Liam Neeson died for in Fallout 3 is nothing compared to this absolute clusterfuck. Building structures can be quite annoying, as it seems as though there are incomplete tile sets for them as well. There's a bunch of options for wooden buildings, but most of them look like complete shit. I understand there's a lot of scrapped wood that's being used, but there's still other building pieces that look perfectly fine. So why can't we have some slightly nicer looking walls, roofs, and doors? And no, this can't be defended with the excuse that it's a post-apocalypse and all the materials are scavenged, because not only are there better looking pieces to build with by default when it comes to floors, but we can also scrap entire trees for resource, showing we could have proper planks of wood, and not just ugly scrap garbage nailed together. Not to jump ahead or anything, but this is an issue for the DLC too. You could build barns and warehouses, which are just reskins of each other, and among the objects you can build are windows and doors with windows in them, and both face the same issue, where most of the individual panes of glass will be broken. Considering you're using old Nuka-Cola bottles, milk bottles, and other sources of glass for these windows, it's implied they're being melted down and remade into window panes, so why the fuck would they be broken when you just made them? Similar case for metal actually. A lot of the metal pieces you can build look like junk, but you're scrapping tin cans and other various metal objects to use them to make entirely new objects, which again, implies you're melting down the scrap and reforging it into something new. So why does it all look so fucking garbage? The answer is because these aren't unique assets for the sake of building settlements, they're just giving you access to the objects they built much of the existing world with, which seems to imply this system really was slapped in with little thought or effort. By the way, making customers to pay extra to use assets that exist in the base game? Real fucking classy, Bethesda. The barn and warehouse assets appear in the base game, but can only be accessed for use in settlements through DLC. Why put in the effort to make things look nice, when you could just reuse existing assets for settlements, even though it makes no sense? Obviously, I'm not looking for something beautiful or anything of the sort, just a bit less shit than what we've got. As for the metal building options, it seems to be even more limited, with a couple of basic pieces and not a whole lot more. There's even an option for this Quonset hut type thing, but it has no proper end cap for it, so building them just seems like a waste since you can't ever get them to look good. And if you want to slap a normal wall on it, it doesn't seem to snap properly. In fact, there's a lot of issues when building with this system, in trying to get things to snap together properly. It's just a shit show all the way around. Additionally, the game is very finicky with where you can place objects and how some snap together, but this system could also lead to floating settlement objects which... I mean, come the fuck on, Bethesda. This would be excusable if this were a mod, not a fucking AAA game. I know it wasn't out at the time, but even an indie game like Valheim built a system for objects breaking if they're not supported. 7 Days to Die has this feature too. In fact, this entire system ends up feeling like a mod rather than official content, and I've played other Fallout games with settlement building mods that handle many of these aspects much better. There's also an issue with placing certain objects seemingly at random too. For example, I've tried placing Nuka-Cola machines and filing cabinets, only to be completely disallowed if I get too close to a wall, even though there's plenty of space. So if I want to put these objects somewhere, I'm kind of fucked out of luck. I can't put them against the wall where they should be, so they're just kind of out and away from it, which looks like shit. Rather than being against a wall, they're just sitting in the middle of a room. Nearly every NPC you get in your settlement will be nameless randos with no armor, and they'll only ever come with pipe weapons. There are some special named NPCs you can acquire, and some of them do sell special and unique items, but the overwhelming majority are nameless randos, so there's little connection or care for them. Worse yet is the fact that some of them are randomly synths, who might go mad and start killing your other settlers. It's also not clear if they're synths rescued by the railroad, or synths sent by the Institute. There's videos showcasing the odd behaviors of synth settlers, as if they're breaking down and going berserk, similar to the Broken Mask incident, but that only makes the whole synth issue even fucking worse than before. On top of literally everything else, apparently they can still just go randomly mad and turn hostile for no reason. In which case, how have other synth operatives or escapees lasted so long without facing the same issue? It's super duper lucky those vital to the Institute's operations and spying on the surface never had this issue. Or maybe these are supposed to be synths rescued by the railroad. But that wouldn't make any sense either, as they make it clear they get them out of the region. So not only should this kind of thing be happening all around the USA if they're still defective, but it raises the question of how plot-critical characters like Dance manage to avoid going crazy like this. Again, I don't know if these synths are rescued by the Railroad or if they're Institute spies, because I never found anything in the game that says either way. But neither case makes sense. As mentioned in part 2 of this analysis series, your settlers all come pre-equipped with pipe weapons and basic clothing. So if you want them to have armor or better weapons, you now need to burden your inventory by collecting these items from the world and the enemies you kill. It feels like Bethesda did this, so there is no chance of gaming the system by getting settlers who spawn with something decent and just taking it from them. But I do find it quite obnoxious that every single one of them just has a shitty pipe gun. There isn't even an easy option for doing this either. You have to manually go to each settler and give them the individual items you want them to have, and manually equip each and every item. That's fine if you want to be very particular about how you customize them, but if you just want them to be effective or just not look like garbage, it becomes tedious. There should be an option to order weapon and armor crates from a merchant that they get by default, or have your sellers make new equipment for themselves, either specialized builds if you want to give them all combat armor for example, or whatever else, or crates of armor random pieces if you don't care so much. To prevent any kind of exploitation of this system on the player's part, just make these specific versions of the items unavailable to the player. Additionally, the NPCs basically serve as a little more than mindless robots. They don't seem to do goddamn anything by themselves. What's that? No one's farming food? No one is taking care of anything? They all just wander aimlessly and do nothing, wasting time. Why can't they do anything on their own without being told? Well, sometimes they'll tend crops on their own, but it seems a bit random from my experience. It's less of a settlement building feature and more of a forced dictatorship. Literally, you're forced into the position of dictating that these dumb fucks actually have to do things to keep themselves alive. Giving the player the ability to assign them to certain jobs is one thing. It makes sense to focus on a task important to the player. Trade routes, being a merchant, finding additional scrap to make the player's job a little easier, and so forth. But the fact they do pretty much nothing by default is just stupid and obnoxious. Especially if you're trying to build something, and you see these fuckers slowly approaching you from a goddamn mile away, and they just stand there like creepy fucking robots waiting for you to exit the settlement building mode, so they can introduce themselves as random nameless asshole number 85,642, and asking for a job to do, which you can't even dictate from dialogue. I don't know, buddy, maybe you could just pick from the available fucking options that already exist? I think part of the problem is that there just isn't enough jobs for NPCs to potentially do, so they come across as useless. There's like an entire 5 jobs: tending crops, running stores, quote-unquote scavenging, which doesn't even send them out into the world, running caravans between settlements, and guard duty. The whole crops thing seems to be half-assed. If there isn't enough food, NPCs will just kinda leave. But there's no strict benefit to having them anyways, aside from having a few stores and having a minuscule amount of junk spawn into your workbench. In fact, the scavenging station is basically worthless just to how little it spawns for you. All unemployed settlers will collect 1 random junk item per day, and a settler assigned to the workstation will collect 2 random junk items per day. However, there's a limit to how much junk they'll put into your workbench, specifically 100 plus population times 5. So for example, if you have 10 settlers, then the junk cap in the workbench is just 150 items. Or in other words, basically fucking nothing. It seems like the main reason they even build these things is simply to reduce the unemployment in your settlement, so you could get more settlers to your settlement, but there's no point to it. Additionally, because there's so few actual settlements in Fallout 4, like Diamond City, the world is a bit short on reliable merchants as it is. Now with the right perks and about 20 levels and a shitload of caps, you can set up shops at each of your settlements to help fill out the available shopkeepers to sell shit to. A solution to many of these issues could be something similar to RimWorld, where each character is given a random name, set of skills, and personality traits, which I realize is already asking too much of Bethesda, but it would make it so the effectiveness of your settlement is dependent on assigning the right person to the right job. It would give the system some depth, and you can include the pre-made characters mentioned earlier, and they can be more specialized for certain tasks. It's not perfect, but it's sure as fuck better than whatever the hell this shit is. Though we'd also need something for each of the settlers to do for this to even be worth it, and you should get bonuses for different work types being done. For example, by having crops, water purifiers, and shops in your settlement, the settlement will naturally generate food, water, and caps for you by default. This is how it works in the base game. Additional job types could additionally generate useful items for you. For example, if you were to assign settlers to crafting ammo, you could similarly receive ammo as part of running your settlement, and it would make a lot of sense to establish a manufacturing operation if the Minutemen are going to defend themselves. You could even have it so the game detects the weapons you carry and use the most, and generate ammo for you based on that, or give the player the choice to get NPCs to focus on creating the type of ammo you want. Further, you could send out teams of NPCs to hunt wild animals, or even fight off raiders on their home turf. Each settlement should also have a unique trait or benefit that makes them stand out more, makes them valuable and not just another settlement, and gives the player a tactical reason for wanting it as a settlement. This place has more fertile soil, so food grows more abundantly, and faster, and in a higher quantity. This place has a radio tower, so we could start up a new station and report on things, and play music the other radio stations don't. And I don't mean a copy of the Minutemen radio either, fuck that obnoxious shit. This place has access to an old factory we can use to forge important items, such as new building materials or weapons and armor and so forth. It would go a long way to making each settlement location feel more important than just a random town full of random nameless NPCs that you can slightly customize. I can't even remember the overwhelming majority of settlement locations, except the few that stood out because I had to visit them often for quests in doing this video series. They ended up being more hassle defending and being harassed about them being attacked. It's annoying for the fact the game doesn't even consider what you're in the middle of doing for these attacks either. If you're in the middle of a quest, a settlement could come under attack and be damaged as a result if you don't swoop in to defend it in time. Building walls does nothing either. The raiders just spawn in the center of the settlement sometimes, so it appears as though they just teleport past the walls. They seem to just be there for the sake of decoration, which is also annoying as hell. Why would you waste resource on what limited space you've got to build walls that don't do anything? Furthermore, this entire system just comes across as pointless. It's as though Bethesda saw the crafting and building systems in other games and just wanted to have their own, but didn't give any strong reason to really engage with this system, outside maybe the simple desire to just build stuff that some people have. It's just your own personal little ant farm that you can decorate, with no end goal and no real purpose. That's not to discount the creative things people have done with this system at all either. In fact, I'd argue that such creations are made in spite of the lackluster system. It's also a bit contradictory that you can have unlimited energy for settlements too. The opening of the game starts off explaining that a lack of resource, especially energy, was the main cause for the war. We even see a clip of people bum-rushing an energy plant as if they think they can just loot energy or something. Yet you can just build generators like it's not an issue at all. I'm not necessarily saying you should have to constantly refuel them, it's more that this would be an incredibly hard issue to solve regardless, because you need power in order to run certain machines, but at the same time, if power is that easy to acquire, it kinda goes against the whole idea that a lack of power is what led to the world being in this state. It would be like if Fallout 3 told us that a dire lack of water was a problem for people in the capital wasteland, then in gameplay, pure water was trivial to obtain in massive quantities. Oh wait, they did that. There's an additional issue with NPC pathing that's nothing short of expected at this point. During my somewhat recent playthrough for the remake of Part 1 of this series, I decided to build a little apartment complex for my settlers, giving each a unique room. Yeah, as it turns out, they can't climb stairs in some cases for some reason, making this whole thing a waste of time. I tried to engage with the game, and my effort turned out to be a complete waste. Thank you, Todd. Ultimately, the settlement building system in Fallout 4 is pretty much the same as the entire rest of the game. Half-assed and not thought out well in the slightest. What a shock. The one positive I can say is that I at least have the option to express myself creatively. And the DLCs add objects that can help with this, though I'm not big on the DLCs and they're a discussion for another time. Crafting was initially introduced in Fallout 3 in a rather simple form. You could find schematics through the game world, and you'd be able to craft a few select special weapons at workbenches throughout the world. It wasn't particularly deep, and overall was extremely limited. New Vegas expanded upon this significantly, allowing you to break down ammo into their core components, so you could reuse them to craft other kinds of ammo, as well as finding the base materials to craft that ammo anyways. You could convert energy weapon ammo into other kinds of energy weapon ammo. You could create a couple kinds of armor, as well as numerous chems, drinks, food, medicine, skill books, poison, and even weapons and repair kits. Fallout 4 further extends this system and makes some changes to it as well. There's 5 kinds of workbenches besides the settlement workshop. These are the armor workbench, the chemistry station, cooking station, power armor station, and weapons workbench, though there's far too many weapon and armor mods to go over them all individually. Generally speaking, all the armor mods do is provide some minor benefit to your character in some way. Reducing the weight of the item, improving carrying capacity, reducing falling damage, reducing limb damage, reducing radiation taken, reducing detection due to movement, taking less action points to sprint, increased movement speed while sneaking, reduced damage from energy weapons, and immunity to being set on fire, reduced damage from explosions, and so forth. It varies from piece to piece on what is available for it exactly, but the thing is, combat isn't so complex that any of these are overly worth the time and effort in order to obtain the materials and perks to build them. I suppose you could do specialized builds, such as energy resistance, but completing armor sets seems like that would be extremely time consuming, especially with each set having differing tiers of quality, not even mentioning all the inventory management that would be required to keep track of your specialized sets. While I certainly like the idea of armor modding, it just doesn't seem too practical the way it's implemented here, and it's entirely possible to get through the game without ever using it. It's also worth noting that all the benefits of these armor mods and pieces are nullified by wearing power armor. So if you keep stocked up on fusion cores, which isn't overly difficult, you don't even need to worry about modding or even wearing regular armor pieces. Weapon mods seem to get the most amount of attention from people who like this game, and I honestly just don't see why. It's one of those systems that's interesting in concept, but it just feels like the execution falls short, since I've never noticed a significant change with most weapon mods I used. The best mod I could think of is turning one of the guns into a 50 cal sniper, but that feels pointless in a game that could have just as easily had a 50 cal sniper appear on loot tables and merchant stock. It's like the equivalent of not having swords be available as drops or through purchase in a fantasy game, but letting you mod a dagger to have a handle and blade that would turn it into a sword. It just feels like the game is arbitrarily locking something away behind a system to give purpose to that system, rather than coming up with an interesting utility to that system. That's not to say all the weapon mods are bad or useless. There are some genuinely good ones, like the mods that turn the laser rifle into an automatic weapon, or a sniper rifle. Though I do wish they had the implication that these mods are entirely new, because just looking at them makes them feel like they're a standard pre-war build option, rather than something jury-rigged together in the wasteland. Another problem with the weapon modding system is the fact that some mods are just outright objectively better than other mods. Many weapons have a best mod or best selection of mods. For the chemistry station, you can craft any of the standard chems, such as jet, mentats, and so forth, as well as both variations of these chems and combinations of some of them. Additionally, you could craft grenades, various healing items, mines, and syringer ammo, which is the only weapon in the game to have ammo types, which is unfortunate, because it was certainly a good system in New Vegas. Anyways, it's fairly straightforward. Similarly, the cooking station allows you to make a couple of drinks, as well as a bunch of food items. Overall, I do like that the crafting system was added. It at least gives an alternate way of obtaining certain equipment and useful items. However, it just seems like a bog standard crafting system, which I guess isn't necessarily a bad thing. Despite some improvements, both enemies and enemy variety are in a pretty sad state in Fallout 4. Bethesda seems to have this issue reusing shit ad nauseum, regardless of whether it makes sense or not. Classic example I've referenced numerous times at this point are the super mutants. Fallout 3 had the exact same issue. Fallout 76 again had the exact same issue. In all three of these games, it makes no sense for the super mutants to be on the East Coast, and it makes no sense for them to be mindless killing machine brutes, and in all three games Bethesda had to bullshit an excuse for them to make an appearance. In Fallout 3, a vault just had FEV, this top secret military project, even though it made no sense for them to have it. In Fallout 4, the Institute just has it, because reasons. I've tried finding an answer for this, but it's not clear. I believe it's implied they acquired it after the war, but then where the fuck did they get it from? A Brotherhood autopsy report states that the Commonwealth super mutants are different from both the Mariposa and Capital Wasteland super mutants, meaning there's another fucking strain of this shit out there in the world somewhere. What was originally contained to one part of the country is now just fucking everywhere, because Bethesda wants to put super mutants into every Fallout game without any care for whether it makes any goddamn sense or not. I've also already mentioned it, but these super mutants have suicide bomber units now, which just makes them even more ridiculous than before. Aside from that though, super mutants seem to act as little more than raiders, but bigger. Switching gears here, Deathclaws have also made a return, and for the most part, they're pretty pathetic. As mentioned previously, you fight a Deathclaw within the first 20 or so minutes of the game, if you're following the main story. And while Bethesda clearly tried to make it into an epic fight, it more so just comes off as really lame more than anything else. One of the deadliest creatures in the series has been turned into a goddamn joke at the start of the game. As with any enemy, a Deathclaw can still fuck you up if you get cornered by one, but for the most part they just don't have the impact they used to, because it feels like they've been nerfed. I've gone over Raiders and Gunners already, so there's no real reason to cover them again, aside from just reiterating that they're little more than generic enemies. As for ghouls, they're a mixed bag for me. On one hand, they're creepier than they've ever been, especially in terms of movement, but they're also just zombies now. I've talked about this before, but I find it genuinely annoying that Bethesda just treats ghouls as if they're functionally the same as zombies, when they never have been. Remember, ghouls in the original Fallout games were described as being slow-moving and frail, especially the feral ghouls. Starting in Fallout 3, they sprint at you like goddamn Olympic athletes, and can hit like a truck at higher levels, and can tank shotgun blasts. One aspect I do like is the detail of shooting body parts off of still living creatures. This mostly applies to ghouls and robots, including the Gen 2 synths, though I think it absolutely should be applied more widely. It's a really great detail, and actually kind of works into what I was talking about earlier in regards to the shooting. Please do more of this, Bethesda. That said, this isn't without its flaws either. Unfortunately, taking out the leg of a ghoul immediately renders it completely inert. For a ravenous feral creature, it's a bit strange that losing a leg renders it absolutely harmless. Why does it not still try crawling towards you? Why does it not reach out and try to attack you when you're standing 3 inches away from its face? No clue, they just don't. Honestly, it would have made them far more creepy if they could continue crawling while missing legs, or if their legs are too damaged to use. One of the bigger issues, however, is the general lack of enemy variety. Once again, much like Fallout 3, Fallout 4 suffers from reusing aspects from previous games that don't make much sense given the setting, beyond just the super mutants. Why are the Deathclaws here? Why are there rad scorpions in fucking Boston? I do appreciate that Bethesda has made some new enemy types. It does genuinely spice up the world by showing us something new that doesn't break the lore. However, the enemy pool still feels rather limited, and aside from the Assaultron and Mirelurk Queen, most of the new additions are low-tier wildlife, such as bloodbugs, stingwings, and the mutated deer. We've got your typical human enemy in raiders, gunners, and any other hostile sapient humanoid with a gun or melee weapon. Super mutants who are just that but bigger. Ghouls who act far more like zombies than before. Dogs, mole rats, yaoguai, deathclaws, bloatflies, rad scorpions, rad roach, stingwing, bloodbug, mirelurk. Mirelurk King and Queen. Mr. Gutsy and his variants, Protectron, Sentry Bots, Assaultron, and Synths, which are essentially just another type of human, so I'm not even going to count them as a new entry. That's about 18 enemy types in the base game that you will face throughout the game. I'm also ignoring several because they're either non-hostile like the Radstags, who typically flee by default, Eyebots, cats, Brahmin, or various birds, or there's only extreme rare encounters with them, some even having only one encounter, such as the synth gorillas, and the one singular alien, because we apparently didn't learn a lesson from the shit show that was Mothership Zeta, nor the implications from canonizing aliens. I'm also ignoring DLC enemies because this is still just coverage of the base game. While this is certainly a step up from Fallout 3, I still feel there could have been more variety in enemy types, especially considering for a good 80% of the game, you're simply fighting humans, synths, super mutants, and maybe ghouls, and none of them have the lore or writing behind them to make them more interesting, and for the rest of the game, you're fighting variations of existing enemies. While it's absolutely a good thing that Bethesda added more creatures in the form of bloodbugs and stingwings, they're very low-tier enemies and you rarely face off against them. This is a fictional world with essentially limitless potential. Why can't we see other kinds of mutant creatures and humanoids in the game? Maybe some psychers who can set the environment on fire, or use telepathy to throw items in your direction. Where the direct line of sight with them isn't an issue, because their projectiles can come from any direction. You could come up with a variety of abilities for them. Same goes for the wildlife. Bugs have been shown to have extreme mutations, but dogs and bears just go bald and get angry. Sometimes a creature has an extra leg or head or something, but you could take it far beyond that too if you wanted. You could invent other mutagenic substances that massively change the wildlife that isn't the FEV or a variation of it. But no, instead we spend 90% of the game shooting humans, large mutated humans, or humanoid robots with guns. It's like having a vast fantasy world with thousands of unique fictional creatures and races to play as, but 90% of your enemies are human with sword. As if the bullet spongy enemies weren't bad enough already, meet legendaries, motherfucker! There's honestly not a lot to say about them. It's just sometimes a random enemy is selected to be legendary, and they become stronger, and once you drop them down to about half their health, they completely heal. I guess because bullet sponges are challenging or something? Rather than making them interesting to fight by giving them special abilities or more intelligent AI, what we get instead is an enemy coded to refresh its health, which just makes them annoying to fight, and makes it feel like what work you did to get their health down was wasted. This is made even worse by the fact that most legendary items are just garbage. The idea is that you're given a rare, useful, and powerful item for taking down a stronger than normal foe. But the end result is a system that was half-baked at best. Yep, the most important thing about legendary enemies are the items they drop, which are pretty useless for the most part. Sure, you could potentially get something amazing, like a shotgun that never needs to be reloaded, or a minigun that fires explosive rounds, but most times you're going to get something absolutely fucking worthless, like a tire iron that does more damage to mirelurks or ghouls, or maybe a piece of armor that resists damage from super mutants and so on and so forth. As you can see here, I've got a huge collection of legendary items from my very first character in Fallout 4. I made this character back on release day 2015, and took the day off work to play it, and most of the legendary items I found in that playthrough are worthless trash. What's worse is that this largely comes across as magical enchantments, similar to the Elder Scrolls games. For example, how does that tire iron do more damage to ghouls specifically? What about it causes them to be more damaged by it? How do these boxing gloves or this flamethrower do more damage at night and less in the day? How does this meat hook cause radiation damage? I don't know, it just does. I guess a wizard did it. It's total nonsense. Similarly, guns can have effects such as fire rounds, explosive rounds, cryogenic rounds, and even radiation rounds. It just transmutes these properties into your bullets as you fire them from your gun. It makes no sense, it's literally just magic at this point. This is honestly just a feature that would fit in with the Elder Scrolls far better than Fallout. If I could enchant a sword to do fire damage in Elder Scrolls, it makes sense because it is a magic effect tied to the weapon that deals fire damage. When I shoot a normal bullet out of a gun, and it magically turns into an incendiary round, that makes no sense at all. What's worse is that it feels very pointless. I never felt the need to carry around a weapon that does extra damage to ghouls or super mutants or whatever other enemy. Carry space is already limited in these games as it is, especially if you're gathering crafting and building materials, and there's far better legendary weapon effects. So lugging around a pipe pistol that does extra damage to super mutants just feels like a waste of space. I don't have too much to say about the regular armor for the most part, though I do feel like it's a very mixed bag. In my experience, the game hasn't really made it clear what items are total outfits that remove armor pieces, and what items can have armor strapped over them. This leads into some situations where I put some clothing on my character, then put some armor on, only for my character to suddenly be fully naked except for that one piece of armor strapped to their body. It's obviously not the end of the world, but it is irritating. I do like that Bethesda seems to be trending back towards having individual armor pieces, however. One part I really liked about Morrowind was that every armor set was made up of various pieces that often made a whole set, and you can mix and match, which was particularly useful should you ever find some really good artifacts. This started getting trimmed back in Oblivion, where there were less and less pieces to a set as they got combined together into one item, particularly pauldrons being attached to Cuirass and Fallout 3 simply having one item for the body and one item for the head. With Fallout 4, we do get individual armor pieces back, largely due to the modification system, but my issue is more with their physical design. I'll be honest, a lot of them just kinda look like shit, and look like they do very little to actually protect you in a gunfight. I find the synth armor by far to be the ugliest. As for the weapons, I don't find them to be particularly good or bad, with few exceptions. As mentioned, rather than having ammo types, each gun just has a default normal bullet. No hollow point or armor piercing, or slugs for shotguns. I don't know why they would remove a feature that was so well received in New Vegas, and only expanded the ability of players to handle situations. I know I just mentioned it, but it's worth repeating. The legendary weapon system will just transmute properties such as flame or frost damage into bullets, when this is something that could have been easily solved with ammo types. The biggest issue I have is with the absurdly common pipe guns. I get Bethesda is super duper proud of their weapon modding system, and the ability to reconfigure guns to look and function entirely different from what they used to look like, though only a few guns have that level of modability, but it does get a bit tiring seeing pipe weapons all the time. Sometimes in a game with item progression, you'll grow so powerful that the lowest tier of equipment becomes rare, or is even removed entirely. Not so with pipe guns. They are a plague that curse the wasteland with their presence. They're not worth much to sell. They're weak, they're incredibly ugly, and they will make up a very, very large pool of the guns you find throughout the game at both level 1 and level 50 fucking thousand. For a point of reference, the very first gun you ever get is better than pipe guns, and every other gun you find that isn't a pipe gun will be better than pipe guns in every instance, so there's no reason to ever use one. It's because of this that they seem to have no place in the world. See, in most RPGs, your default starting weapon will often be the absolute worst weapon in a game. Oftentimes it's a rusty sword or a bent sword, or some variation of a fucked up garbage sword. It's part of the whole progression from nobody to hero of the realm, as you abandon that starting sword for something better, and usually get the legendary hero sword by the end. The problem is that pipe guns are the rusty sword in a game that starts you off a tier above that, and since most weapons can be found or bought relatively easily and early on, there's never a dire need to mod a pipe gun into a gun you might need, because everything outclasses it. And on top of that, because this particular rusty sword is one of the most common items in the game, it raises the question of why does this exist? Why do I still need to be finding these in loot containers well into level 50? You might make the argument that they're the low tier weapons given to enemies, but then why are they so common in loot intended for the player to take? Also, why should the enemies be using such utter dogshit weapons in a world where good weapons are common? See, for a point of comparison, 7 Days to Die has pipe weapons too, but they fill a role in progression really fucking well. See, guns aren't so common in loot or rewards early on, and the good guns are going to be very expensive. Almost certainly out of your price range early on. Pipe weapons are almost like a godsend early in a 7 Days world, because you've been stuck bashing enemies with a wooden club, or whatever other melee weapons or tools you've got, and those enemies are getting stronger. You're likely taking hits, and possibly getting infected, which deals serious debuffs the higher the infection grows, and antibiotics are another very rare loot item. So when you get that pipe gun, it's almost sort of a big relief. Sure, it kinda sucks, it's slow to reload, the shotgun and rifle only take a single shot, but they make sense in the way they function, and they're genuinely helpful to a playthrough. They make looting buildings easier, they make killing zombies easier, and they can even come in handy in a tight spot, as it can often be difficult to escape from zombies if you get cornered. Pipe guns in Fallout 4 fill no such role. They seem to exist purely to annoy you. Well, that's not fair. They seem to exist purely to show off modding weapons, but as a result, they're one of the most common items in the game, and they're worthless to you. I've never once found the need to use a pipe gun in Fallout 4. I've never once been playing and got in a tight spot and said to myself, damn, I really wish I had a pipe gun on me right now. And every nameless settler who joins their settlement will always have one by default, meaning you have to collect better weapons you might not care about otherwise for the sake of giving them something better. It's just extremely irritating that these shitty, ugly guns are as common as they are. Also, they're incredibly ugly, have I mentioned that? Because they are! Again, referencing 7 Days, their pipe guns look great. Like, yeah, they're not amazing to look at, they're not beautiful, but they don't look revoltingly ugly. They make sense for what they are, and even have unique animations to show they're not great to work with. I do like that damage types have been added. There's normal damage, but also energy, radiation, and poison. I feel like this could have been expanded to further include fire, frost, bleed, and other types. Problem is, it just doesn't feel like these alternate damage types come up a whole lot either. By far, the most common alternative damage type seems to be radiation, and that damage is far more useful in the hands of NPCs than it is to you, because the player seems to be affected by radiation differently than NPCs. I know I've mentioned this before, but radiation is a direct subtraction to your maximum health. I think this is a really, really, really bad idea. See, radiation is the silent killer. You can get a lethal dose of radiation without immediately knowing it. By making radiation a direct subtraction to your maximum health, it's no longer a silent killer, but the equivalent of loud alarm klaxons blaring in your ears, because every point of radiation you take and don't cure is 1 point of health the enemy no longer has to take away from you to kill you. As such, it becomes far more important to take care of any radiation you take immediately. The previous Fallout games handled this far better. In Fallout 1 and 2, you might not even know you're taking on rads until you start feeling the effects of it, and your Pip-Boy warns you. In Fallout 3 and New Vegas, your constant companion, the Pip-Boy, is now also a Geiger counter, making you aware of any rads you're actively taking, and keeps track in the Pip-Boy. But when you're not taking rads, it's something that can easily be forgotten. While rads are trivial to manage in 3 New Vegas, it still filled the role of that silent threat by functioning the way it does, and by giving more debilitating effects to the player as their rads increased. More importantly though, is the fact that radiation guns seem to work like normal guns towards enemies. I've never seen an NPC in these games take radiation damage and die. Further, through basic gameplay and not looking under the hood at all, it seems as though radiation guns just do regular damage to enemies, and it seems to affect their health no differently than normal damage, and what's even worse is that NPCs supposedly immune to radiation still take damage from these weapons. Well, as it turns out, Fallout 4 treats radiation a bit weirdly, in that it's split into two kinds of damage, which is radiation poisoning and radiation damage. Essentially it works like this. The radiation poisoning effect, which is what the gamma gun does, as well as any weapon with the radiation legendary effect, works the same as environmental poisoning. They will subtract from a character's health bar in the same way normal radiation does. Characters who should be immune to radiation are unaffected by this kind of radiation. Radiation damage, on the other hand, seems to function as regular damage in the sense that it simply takes health away. However, for some inexplicable reason, this results in radiation-immune characters taking direct radiation damage because it penetrates their immunity somehow, while radiation-resistant characters take less damage than radiation-immune characters would. This is bizarre and nonsensical. It would be like something that is immune to fire being destroyed due to a fire, while something that is resistant to fire is simply slightly damaged. But regardless of that fact, these simply just aren't great weapons to use due to how many enemies are resistant or immune to radiation. Why use a gamma gun when a normal one will do the job in most cases? The only exception, apparently, is that gamma guns are actually super useful in the highest difficulty, as the radiation poisoning enemies take, at least the ones that are affected by it, is a flat rate and not influenced by your weapon skills, so they're more effective at killing enemies. Next up is the laser musket. I despise this thing. First off, it feels like something totally nonsensical was made just to have an appropriately themed weapon for the Minutemen. This colonial-era weapon, but given a sci-fi twist by being a laser weapon, and doing it in the most stupid way possible. It looks like shit. Then we have to look at how it functions. It's essentially a wind-up weapon.
Charge your gun! Oh, right!
That's fine, it even makes sense for this world to have something work like this, but the problem is that it still uses ammo. Why in the world do you need to charge the damn thing if it still needs ammo? I thought the point of winding it up was to give it the energy so it could take a shot. As it turns out, winding up the musket adds an additional charge to your next shot, each charge taking up 1 ammo and increasing damage. But then that raises the question of why do you need to charge it instead of just loading the ammo into it? I also just never felt this weapon was useful with how fast the combat in Fallout 4 goes, especially if you're dealing with a lot of enemies. Even worse than that, we already saw a wind-up gun in New Vegas and it didn't take ammo. Then we've got the assault rifle. This thing is just an ugly abomination. It's apparently a combination between the M249 and the Lewis gun, but it just looks really dumb. Apparently it was made to look good in the hands of someone in power armor, but for that to work it would have to look good in the first place. Finally we've got the power armor, and this is a bit of a mixed bag. I've already talked about how dumb it is to be gifted a set at the very start, and I touched briefly on the XO1 retcon, including the Nuka-Cola skin for it. I've also mentioned that the way power armor functions is one of the aspects I like for the most part. There's several components to power armor overall, and I'm going to talk about all of them. First and foremost, I love the general feel of power armor in this game. It feels pretty much how I think power armor should feel in a first-person setting. It's big and bulky, the ground shakes as you run, and fall from heights. It's pretty good. I genuinely hope this is something they carry forward into future Fallout games. Next up is durability, and this is a bit of a weird one for me. See, I'm one of those people that actually advocates for this to be a part of games like this. I know a lot of people hate it in their games, but I feel like it adds that extra element of being in a hostile world, and needing to make sure your equipment is in tip-top shape, so you can deal with enemies. I also like the idea that it prevents you from relying too heavily on one single weapon for your entire playthrough. It's a system that, when it's gone, I feel my weapons are more generic and unimportant. I pay far greater attention to the weapons I'm using in Morrowind, Oblivion, Fallout 3, and Fallout New Vegas than I do in Skyrim and Fallout 4, for example. That said, I think the way it's handled here isn't great. See, it's an arbitrarily split system purely for the sake of making power armor annoying to use. Only power armor has durability. No other weapons or armor suffers from this system. Rather than making power armor more interesting, this has the opposite effect, where it simply makes it more annoying to use than it otherwise would. See, without power armor, you could go from combat encounter to combat encounter to combat encounter, or complete the entire main story, but I repeat myself, without needing to stop at a town or at a home base to take care of repairs. If all equipment needed to be repaired, then it would simply be a part of your normal stop, but because power armor specifically has durability, and nothing else does, it makes it more of a burden on your gameplay for the fact that this one piece of equipment in particular is disrupting your gameplay, as opposed to general maintenance of all equipment. If everything needs to be taken care of, it becomes a natural part of the loop, and incentivizes players to interact with town locations. If only one thing needs to be taken care of, then it disrupts the flow of gameplay. It's almost sort of similar to how in games, especially MMOs, most players will try to get all the quests available in a town, and take care of them all before returning to town if they can, because stopping to turn in one quest, then go back out and complete all your other quests, constantly only turning in one quest at a time, slows the game down to a crawl. Worse is that even the best power armor in the game can break fairly quickly, resulting in you needing to trudge back to your nearest settlement to fix it very frequently, especially when you might not want to. And to make this even worse, you've got the issue where power armor is modular, where you can mix and match pieces, so they can also break individually as well, where a leg or an arm can break, so it's not even a full set that's being repaired. While I absolutely love the feel of power armor when playing, I found myself abandoning it in my settlements because it simply became too much of a hassle to use in most instances. The only reason it's shown up in most of my gameplay for this series is because I was using God mode for most of it when not gathering footage for the gameplay sections. Now this was clearly done to limit how much you use it, but there was already a limit in the form of fusion cores. Fusion cores were newly introduced as a way to limit players from using power armor too much, because a free set is given away at the very start of the game, and you likely won't have too many cores early on. However, they do become trivial to acquire relatively quickly, thus nullifying, or at the very least heavily reducing their purpose as a limit to power armor. I don't think there's any good reason for both systems to exist at the same time. I don't like them on an individual basis, but combined they just ruin using power armor at all. As for the fusion cores themselves, they present a number of problems, though some of them will be discussed a little later. First of all is the fact that they immediately present a lore break. Originally, power armor was described as having enough fuel to last 100 years. Further, power armor in Fallout 3 and New Vegas also didn't require a special power source. Now they do, and they're a power source that runs out incredibly quickly, and additionally, this power source has shared ammo with the Gatling laser. This was an arbitrary change that, as mentioned, made even using power armor more frustrating than it needs to be, but it's also an entirely pointless break in the lore that just wasn't necessary in the slightest. The reason I've heard people give for it was to limit power armor early on, but you can also do that by just not giving the player power armor immediately. This is absolutely the result of focusing more on the rule of cool over anything else. I will say, however, that as much as I dislike fusion cores entirely, I do like that Bethesda at least made it so you could both target them in VATS to blow them up, and that you can pickpocket them if you're careful. Though you maybe shouldn't be able to pickpocket the power source for the super armor, that doesn't really make sense. I mentioned how power armor is modular already, but I wanted to come back to it quickly. While I do like the more modular armor on paper, and dislike its particular implementation here, again, see Morrowind for how I like how it was done, I absolutely do not like it when it comes to power armor. The thing about power armor is it has always seemed like one big interconnected suit with a helmet that could be removed. It seems very strange that you can mix and match pieces, where you've got a T-45 leg, a T-51 arm, an X-01 chest, and a T-60 helmet. Remember, this is essentially a mech suit meant to protect you from harm. It turns you into a walking tank. I don't see why they would be made to be modular, where every new piece just has to be backwards compatible with older sets of power armor. X-01 has to be compatible with T-45. I just don't think it works with power armor. I will say, however, that I do like the ability to individually mod each piece of power armor. In particular, each piece has certain useful bonuses that can be modded into them, such as targeting on the helmet, or auto stimpack injectors, or improved punching for hand-to-hand combat. Then we come to one of the big issues, and that's the retconning of what the newest version of power armor was before the war. So first of all, in the original Fallout there was just power armor, and this was fine. In Fallout 2 we find out this was, in fact, T-51 power armor. Additionally, we find out that Advanced Power Armor, as well as Advanced Power Armor Mark II, was created by the Enclave after the war. Fallout 3 retroactively adds T-45 power armor because they want a new set for the cover. The first two games had power armor on the cover, so Fallout 3 had to have it too. See, the interesting thing about the Fallout 2 cover wasn't that we saw a new kind of power armor, but the fact that it was something completely unknown. That's part of why the design almost looks alien and insect-like. It wasn't a reiteration of something we've seen, but it was something entirely new, to represent the new threat. With Fallout 3, rather than creating something new and interesting, we get a reiteration of something we've seen, worn by a faction we've seen before. What a perfect representation of Fallout 3, which itself mostly reiterates stuff we've seen before, but far worse. New Vegas is the interesting one here, because it pulls another Fallout 2. We see an entirely new set of armor that is unique and interesting and looks cool. It looks unique when you line up all the covers in the mainline games. Fallout 4 goes on to make the same mistake as Fallout 3, by again being power armor, made even more hilarious when Fallout 76 went and did the same thing, but from the side. It is the perfect representation of Bethesda's lack of creativity because they just do the same thing over and over and over again. When Fallout 5 is announced, the cover art will probably look like this. What's worse, though, is the fact that this is yet another newly invented set of power armor. Where T-51 was the most modern power armor before the bombs dropped, this is now retconned to be T-60 power armor, which was deployed 27 seconds before the bombs dropped. Well, that's not fair. Officially it was a few months. But that's exactly the problem. You could keep inserting new sets of power armor before the bombs dropped using this method. T-60 officially went into service 5 months before the war, but T-70 went into service 4 months before the war, and T-100 was released 3 months before the war, and T-420 went into service 3 months after the bombs dropped because parts of the government held on for a few months and didn't immediately collapse. This is what we call stagnation. Bethesda don't have the creativity to make something truly new, and just keep doing the same shit over again. But also needlessly retconning in their new sets of power armor, because by god do we need a new set of power armor. The worst part is, they didn't need to do a retcon for T-60 to exist, They could have explained T-60 as being an invention of the Brotherhood of Steel, because we needed to see them in this game as well. But this gets even worse, as we couldn't just leave it at retconning in T-60, we also had to fuck over advanced power armor by making that a pre-war invention too, as full sets can be found in pre-war locations that have not been accessed since the bombs have dropped. There's a cope argument that Exo-1 is simply a prototype to advanced power armor, but that in itself is a retcon too. Advanced power armor was made by the Enclave on the oil rig after the war. Bethesda adding prototype to Exo-1's name in Fallout 76 is their cheap-ass cover for this retcon. As mentioned previously, this is made even worse by the Nuka-Cola paint job Exo-1 that appears in Nuka World. That's right, top-secret prototype super armor that is your key to winning the war is given to a cola company and used for fucking marketing. And yes, I realize there are ties between Nuka-Cola and the government, and they had access because of that, blah 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 blah, but that's fucking retreaded. More on that when I cover Nuka World. The world itself is arguably one of the most important parts of many RPGs, and totally unsurprisingly, considering how terrible Fallout 3 and Skyrim's worlds were, Fallout 4 falls woefully short here as well. This section will be relatively short, simply due to the fact that many of the big world-building issues have already been discussed, as they were directly related to the bigger overall subjects talked about earlier in the series, such as stuff relating to the Institute and the Synths or the Minutemen. There's still some stuff to cover independently though. Just as a quick reminder, Fallout 3 has such world-building issues as no one having food because no one farms and all the plant life is dead, and even the Enclave, the faction that's all about the purity of their DNA, eat 200-year-old irradiated food. Slavery is a highly lucrative business, lasting for at least 100 years, despite the fact that no one buys or uses slaves in the capital wasteland. And don't even fucking mention the pit, as that's only been active for 20 years, it cannot be their entire customer base. And people are just rich because the developers wanted a location of rich entitled snobs, despite the fact that none of them even do anything to attain such wealth. As for Skyrim, Whiterun, a town that should be the most wealthy, as it's a centralized trading hub, is apparently dirt poor and can't afford to maintain their walls, to the point the town looks like a ruin. There's a civil war that we're only ever told about, unless we're doing that quest line, and bandits outnumber the civilian population. Now Fallout 4 isn't a complete failure of world building as Fallout 3 is. There are actually people farming, but it's still not looking so great. There's really only a handful of established farming settlements at the start of the game. I'd argue there should be more, but considering people argue in Fallout 3's defense that the farms totally exist, you just can't see them, I suppose I should count myself lucky that Fallout 4 at least has a couple active farms. It is better than nothing, I'd just prefer for there to be a bit more, and have them be more significant. Workshop settlements aside, Fallout 4 only has like 2 real towns, which are Diamond City and Goodneighbor. If we're going to be generous, it has an additional 2 and had another that no longer exists. Bunker Hill and the Slog are both additional existing towns, though they're both settlement workshop locations as well. Additionally, there was Quincy, which was taken over by the Gunners about a month prior to Nate leaving the vault. Now for Fallout 1 and 2, this wouldn't be that big of a deal. The developers typically made the most out of towns like this, and they acted like quest hubs, where several quests could often be found in each of these locations, and you either spend a lot of time in these locations, or return to them frequently. Fallout 3 and 4 don't really do that so much. Megaton and Tenpenny Tower are pretty much irrelevant as soon as you finish the 2 quests involving them, Power of the Atom and Tenpenny Tower respectively. The exception being the player house, otherwise you'd have no real reason to return. Fallout 4 suffers similarly. Bunker Hill is largely used as a set piece for the game, and there's little to no reason to come here, aside from the 2 quests that send you, and for some trading with its merchants. In fact, it's possible to complete all the named quests in the game, both side content and main story on each of the factions, and this is a place you may only have to visit 3 to 4 times. Once in Human Error, twice as part of the Railroad and Institute faction paths, obviously for each side of the Battle of Bunker Hill, and finally you can optionally inform the Brotherhood of Steel of the upcoming battle, and they'll send you there for the final time. That's not to say a town is required to be visited to be important, but Bunker Hill just isn't a town that's very relevant to much. It's just a bit disappointing in a sea of disappointment. More lost potential in a sea of lost potential, where nothing significant is really done with this location. It's just kind of there, I guess, and you can build on it? Similarly, the slug is inhabited by ghouls, who the game establishes as its new canon as not needing food to survive, are growing food in order to survive. Aside from that, this is an otherwise generic settlement location with not a whole lot going on. Now with all that out of the way, the two proper towns we have seem to act as little more than trade hubs, and in the case of Diamond City, a place to dump your stuff off if you don't want to build a settlement, with few significant quests of note between the two. In a world full of people struggling to survive, most people don't seem to have any actual issues that need to be solved, but more errands that need to be run. It's like how Fallout 3, both Megaton and Tenpenny Tower, two major locations, have one significant quest each. In New Vegas, you routinely get quests that are important to the people of whatever town you're at. Ghouls have settled in a place we scavenge for survival. Our town needs a new sheriff. There's a conflict between the locals and the NCR. Fallout 1 and 2 did this as well. My daughter has been kidnapped by raiders. The town is controlled by a merciless gangster. The town security force is corrupt. Oh, a guy needs a can of paint? I guess? Or there's a short quest to go find a missing guy in a muddy basement. Or there's a long drawn-out quest of killing generic enemies, all to reach a pretty underwhelming confrontation between characters you've been given no real reason to care about one way or the other. I realize this does kind of relate back to quests a bit, but there's good reason for bringing up those examples, as they often had a significant impact upon the world building, and many quests inform the player about aspects of the world. It really makes it feel as though no one is really struggling or fighting to survive. It makes it seem as though most people don't have a care in the world, aside from fearing the Institute. Fallout 1, 2, and New Vegas had plenty of quests about solving genuine problems people have, saving important friends and family, solving conflicts, fixing problems that impact their ability to survive, or even advancing goals, such as acquiring tech or power. Most of Fallout 3 and 4's quests are not like this, and even when they come close to it, they're usually very superficial or surface level. I've talked about this quest already, but in Order Up, we actually have a conflict between two groups that could be solved without shooting in Fallout 4, but it's a quest that could be completed in a minute. This is one of the extremely few quests in Fallout 4 that has a conflict that could be resolved peacefully, and it really speaks to the shallowness of Bethesda's writers. They seemingly lack the ability entirely to craft a narrative between opposing groups, with their own realistic, or at least understandable motivations, with numerous solutions including peaceful solutions, and it's really quite unfortunate that almost every conflict Bethesda comes up with is solved with a bullet and nothing else, to the point that it feels like Bethesda just treats Fallout as little more than a playground to shoot stuff in. In fact, there's such an overemphasis on combat that it genuinely feels like story and world building are an afterthought, and that's fine if you want to make that kind of game, but then go make Doom. Don't reduce one of the RPG greats into little more than a rooty-tooty pointed-shooty sandbox. Another big problem is the fact that much like Fallout 3, the world feels very unconnected. The easiest example I can point to is the lack of anyone treating Quincy as though it's another town in the world. Sure, it's not a town anymore, it's an open-air dungeon full of baddies, but no one knows that.
What's that? You said you're a trader up from Quincy? You have enough supplies to keep the general store stocked for a whole month?
And just for a point of reference, Piper acts as though a month's worth of supplies is a big deal, but still no one notices that there hasn't been a caravan from Quincy at all in at least a month, because that's when it fell. Oh wait, this is actually so much more stupid than I realized. See, during editing of this part of the video, I went looking for Preston's line that said the massacre of Quincy was a month ago, to use as an example here, only to find out that it doesn't exist. He said Lexington was a month ago.
A month ago, there were 20 of us. Yesterday, there were 8. Now we're 5. First it was the ghouls in Lexington, and now this mess.
So that already makes this worse, because that means the fall of Quincy was over a month ago. But that's not the stupid part. This is.
Have you heard of the Quincy massacre?
No.
I thought everyone in the Commonwealth knew about that by now.
What's that? You said you're a trader up from Quincy? You have enough supplies to keep the general store stocked for a whole month?
This is yet another prime example of the game contradicting itself anytime it has something to say. Preston isn't a character written to be self-centered or egotistical, so it's not like he's so self-focused as to think that everyone would just automatically know what happened to the Minutemen, or anything of the sort. The problem is that news of Quincy's fall absolutely would spread, and the game acknowledges that it did. Only for Piper, and by extension of the Gateguard accepting her lie, both not knowing this information when they absolutely should. If anything, Diamond City should be more wary of attack, considering the entire town of Quincy was just mass murdered and taken over by the Gunners. Keep in mind, Quincy looks like it was bigger than even Diamond City, and it absolutely is bigger than Goodneighbor. If either of those two towns got wiped off the map, that's the kind of thing everyone should be talking about. These are some of the safest places in the Commonwealth. And yet, Quincy barely gets anything. It's just really weird that something that has such a large impact on the lore, and what looks to have been a very large town, quite possibly the largest in the game had it been a proper town, and just no one seems to care about it or even think about it at all. It's as though it exists within an alternate dimension, and everyone else in the world is simply unaware of it due to not existing in the same plane of reality as everyone else, even though it's a town you can walk to. I suspect the reason for this is the fact that Quincy was likely designed from the ground up to be a dungeon, and it seems as though Bethesda only ever thought of it internally that way, and as such, failed to properly recognize that characters in the world wouldn't see it in the same way. As for Diamond City, I don't entirely hate it. I actually think it's a neat location for a town. My main gripe is with its design. Essentially, the field should be used exclusively for growing crops in a water basin, while all the houses and businesses should have been built in the stands. Realistically, the entire field growing crops probably wouldn't be enough to support an entire town, but my problem isn't the lack of realism, it's the fact that it's just dumb to waste so much space for growing food on housing and leaving most of the stands empty. But I do like that Diamond City is growing its own food. This is absolutely an improvement over Fallout 3, where no one grew anything, and Bethesda absolutely deserves credit for this. Good job! There's also an issue where everyone just seems perfectly fine to live in complete squalor, and I don't know why. Much of this junk and mess you'd want to remove from your living space, but no one cares to. Remember, this isn't the slums of a big city where most people don't care, or ignore it because it's someone else's job. This is a small community, and it's their living space. Hell, there's a lot of this mess under the elevator to the mayor's office. If I had to guess, I'd assume this issue stems from Bethesda not treating Fallout seriously at all, and just thought that in a post-apocalypse world, all the debris would just be there because of course it would! Instead of understanding that most people would clean up and get rid of shit like this from their living space. I also want to talk about the fusion cores again, since I had a lot more to say about them. So you will frequently find power cores inside of these generators, but they don't seem to actually do anything. I've never once taken a core and found any changes to the world around me regarding things that are powered. The only thing it seems to affect is the light directly above them, which is pointless. What purpose do these generators serve within the world, aside of powering the light directly above them? It seems to be none at all. Wouldn't it have been far more interesting if they did more than nothing at all? And you might have to consider if you want to take the power core or not, because it could restrict your access to the rest of the building. Or alternatively, finding generators without the cores and having to spend one, like a generic key, to open up areas of a building. Also, how do they power this light for 200 years but last 10 minutes as a set of power armor? Like, you need to remember that this whole thing happened due to a lack of power, but here we have a power source that can apparently work for 200 years straight without failing, and without losing even a tiny fraction of its charge. But at the same time, it can only power a suit of armor for 10 minutes, when that suit of armor was previously established to have a power source that can last 100 years. We also have a few locations that look interesting initially, but end up being just more of the same, killing generic enemies. For example, we've got the combat zone and the robot racetrack, the former being a bare-knuckle boxing cage match, and the other is, well, it's a robot racetrack. A better game would have let you compete in the boxing match, or place bets on the races, or even include quests, or even small quest lines around these areas, such as fixing fights or races, maybe finding parts to improve one of the robots or something, but no. The combat zone is full of generic baddies to kill so you could get Kate as a companion, and the robot racetrack is nothing special. I can't express how disappointing it is to have found something that looks interesting, only for it to be nothing, especially in a game that is in desperate need of something interesting to do. Hell, even when you enter the combat zone, there's a list of rules on the wall, and one of them is no fighting, yet the entire place immediately turns hostile for no reason. Worse yet, this happens.
And that concludes this round. Kate is the undisputed winner! And who's this? Wait, who let you? Lady, I'd find some cover, quick!
Looks like someone got lost! Oh. You were so dead!
So what, the entire building just defaults to murder when someone they don't know comes in? Yes, I get they're raiders, that doesn't explain it. This is still shown to be an establishment with customers and even rules against fighting, and there's certainly no laws to be concerned about, so why turn hostile? Because Bethesda suck, and shooting even more people in a game where you spend 200 hours shooting people was clearly the most interesting choice to make here. Same goes for the robot racetrack. It is presented upon first glance as something totally unique within the world, not just in Fallout 4, but Fallout as a whole. We haven't seen something like this before.
Maybe it's still in the league. Piece of junk is really showing off those new mods. This race is really heating up. We've got a good, clean race today. Absolutely no funny business. Hey, pipe down out there. We got a race on. Back to the track. It's neck and neck.
What the? You're mine now, rookie.
Old Rusty's as steady as ever. Let's give him a hand, huh? Damn it! What is it now? Come on, you're holding up the race. Take him down, boys. Who the fuck is that?
Special unique lines of dialogue are recorded for this location. An announcer is talking over a loudspeaker, something is designed to draw the player in, and once again, Bethesda goes with what is clearly the single most interesting direction here, by making this an area where you kill a bunch of generic nameless enemies, because the second one the NPCs notices you here, they all turn hostile and start trying to kill you. There's also the big issue of enemy encampments simply being too close together, and characters in the world simply not noticing things that are all around them. In downtown Boston especially, you could find camps of raiders in line of sight of camps of super mutants, and I've only rarely, if ever, seen them interact, when they realistically shouldn't even be this close to one another. This gets exponentially worse when you discover that the Gunners, a military-style group, live next door to a camp of super mutants. This is just nonsense. Similarly, there's an example that Mr. Caption pointed out in his video, where a bunker full of gunners isn't getting the valuable military equipment on the roof that can easily be seen from a nearby hill. Worse yet, there's a cage with power armor in it that they simply didn't cut into to get the suit. This leads me to another issue, and that's a general lack of plundering in most of the world. You have to remember that we're 210 years past the war, and this is a post-apocalypse that's very well lived in at this point, and yet most of the world looks completely untouched, even in locations that are fully populated. I have a theory that the team that designed the dungeons aren't the same people who populated them with enemies, because aside from decorations related to whichever group is occupying the dungeon, most feel like otherwise untouched ruins when they should appear to be more lived in than they do. It's also bizarre to have a mainline Fallout game where slavery doesn't seem to exist in any capacity. Sure, some weirdo tries to buy the dumb ghoul kid from you, and there's the whole deal of the Institute with the simps, but in a world as horrible and brutal and lawless as Fallout, it is outright bizarre that there is no slavery of any kind on the surface in this game. This also sort of ties into another issue that afflicts both this game and Fallout 3, and that's the fact that there are no tribals in the region at all. If society falls for one reason or another, what is likely to happen is that those who survive will fall into tribes of sorts. There's also an issue with the game simply not acknowledging certain things in relation to your character, particularly if you're in power armor or not, where characters don't even seem to notice that you're in it. First up, in the quest Order Up, they will actually acknowledge if you're in power armor.
Chem pushes anything. You know what that junk has done to my boy?
Easy there, Miss Power Armor. This doesn't involve you.
Hey, you know what? That's pretty good. It's an acknowledgement that you being in the super equipment changes the stakes for them. Alright, cool. How about siding with the scavengers in the USS Constitution?
Mandy. Constitution is all ours.
What a little bitch.
What next? This is awkward. We had a vote, and we decided we're not gonna split the hall with you. For what it's worth, I voted against it. You voted to backstab me? We've been fighting Ironsides 4 months. A lot of people died. They say you just can't stroll in at the last minute and get an even share. They also voted to have you dealt with permanently. Can't have you disputing our claim later, so here's the part where you die.
I may be able to collect the case.
Oh dear, that's a little awkward. Maybe they should have just let it go. Maybe they thought they had strength in numbers though. At least it isn't a single person extorting and threatening you for everything you own.
Hey, hold up there. First time in Good Neighbor? You can't go walking around without insurance.
Insurance?
That's right. Insurance. Personal protection, like. You hand over everything you got in them pockets, or accidents start happening to you. Big, bloody accidents.
How fucking embarrassing. We're about 14 hours into this video series now, so it shouldn't be shocking that this game was very lazily made. However, this was worth bringing up, because it's shit like this that damages the world, and can damage your investment within this world. Continuing with this point a bit though, it's also weird how you can run into a random single raider, and they'll still take you on in power armor, as if you weren't wearing it. It's almost like the entire point of these NPCs is to be killed, and no deeper thought went into their designs or anything of the sort. I would genuinely like to see times where raiders are ready to take you on, but then back down when they realize they don't stand a chance, because as it is now, they just come off as suicidal. As I've said previously, the worst part about this game is the missing potential, and this applies to even its smallest of encounters. For example, you could find a raider kneeling over a freshly dug grave with a corpse in it, apparently mourning the person who had died. Hey, that's neat. I wonder what happens when I go up to talk to him. Oh. He's just a generic raider that was kneeling there, and has nothing of interest or value to say. Now obviously I'm not saying this should be the deepest part of the game. However, if you've gone so far as to show this potentially interesting moment, only for it to be nothing, it feels like a waste. You can't talk to him, comfort him, give advice, mock or belittle him, taunt him, or anything of the sort. You could have had a moment like this.
You two have humiliated my family for the last time!
Leave, little boy.
Look at me when I'm talking to you!
Fuck off, Akuji. I'm not killing anyone at Isha's funeral. Tonight, tomorrow, you name a time and I will gladly fuck you up. But not now.
How noble.
But no! God forbid you have an interesting encounter. It's also worth mentioning that despite all these complaints, there are some good details in the game. It's just that in my experience, the bad far outweigh the good. In the secret half of Vault 81, for example, there's 3 lockers on the ground that are clearly being used as makeshift caskets for people who died when the secret half of the vault fell. This is a good little environmental storytelling moment, and there are a bunch of nice little moments like this in the game. But for every moment like this, there seems to be 10 moments like the Raider Grave. This is something I was briefly considering talking about during the Nuka World discussion in the next video, but it made more sense to do it here, as this extends beyond Nuka World, and that's Bethesda's sad over-reliance on nostalgia and the iconic imagery of the series. Nuka World is probably the most egregious example, but let's go over the others first. Starting back in Fallout 3, they reused many aspects from the original games, without understanding them and without handling them well. The entire main story was a piss-poor amalgamation of the stories from the original games, and many major aspects of those games were included into Fallout 3. The Brotherhood of Steel, the Enclave, Super Mutants, Herald, the Gek. I talk about this extensively in my analysis of Fallout 3, but it's worth mentioning here too. There's also a character in Fallout 3 that is obsessed with Nuka-Cola to a cartoonishly absurd degree. Despite living in a wasteland devoid of food, and water is incredibly scarce, and it's shown to be incredibly difficult for anyone to survive, this dumb fucking cartoon character just has a bunch of Nuka-Cola related merchandise because reasons. She shows it off to you like it's a goddamn museum. A character that literally worships a dumb fucking brand and devotes her life to it. Fallout 4 similarly shoves iconography from Fallout 3 all over the place. McCready is here, because remember Lamplight? The goat test is here, because remember that? It's supposed to be like the empathy test from Blade Runner, but it makes no fucking sense here. It's just an incredibly forced reference to the previous game, and to a movie that quite honestly doesn't deserve the insult of being associated with this game. Liberty Prime is here again too, because remember him? Death is a preferable alternative to communism. I actually do really like Liberty Prime, but the problem is the fact he isn't properly utilized here. In Fallout 3, he was required to fight the Enclave and break down their barriers. The Brotherhood literally could not have done it without him, but here all he does is go on a similar death march then blows a hole in the ground, something the Brotherhood could have easily done with some C4 or other kinds of explosives. I mean, they raided a giant stockpile of mini-nukes and special nukes for Liberty Prime. It should have been nothing for them to break into the Institute without him. It seems as though the only reason he was here was because Bethesda wanted to bank more of that nostalgia. But as I said, Nuka World is arguably the most egregious example of this. The world of Fallout is similar to our own in many ways. Part of the story is that the timeline diverged from ours at some point, and things went differently. Though there's obviously changes in how specific things work, such as ghouls existing. Point is, many aspects of the pre-war world of Fallout mirror our own in some way. We have Chrysler, they have Chrysalis. We have the Corvette and the Vega, they have the Corvega. We have General Electric and General Atomics. They have their own General Atomics that seem to largely serve the purpose General Electric does in the real world. We have Coca-Cola, they have Nuka-Cola. See where I'm going with this? For a Fallout game to add a theme park of some kind, one would think it would be a horrifying version of Disney World, or Universal Studios, or Wonderland, or SeaWorld, or Six Flags, or something like that. On the very base concept alone of inventing a theme park for Fallout, there's so much room to work with, to create iconic new parts of the world and lore, invent mascots like Mickey Mouse or Bugs Bunny, but obviously turn them into horrifying Fallout corruptions of those kinds of characters. Maybe even in a very cynical Joe Camel sort of way, where cartoon characters marketing something horrible to children. There's so much potential here, but instead Bethesda opts for the single most lazy fucking option they could have gone for. A Nuka-Cola fucking theme park. Wonderful. I know my favorite theme park in the real world is Coca-Cola Land. I'm no fan of theme parks in general, but fuck Bethesda for doing something so inane and lazy. Rather than trying to make something new and interesting, they make something that's basically played out at this point. Nuka-Cola wasn't this fucking holy grail of culture in the original games. It was just an item that appeared. It's like Bethesda saw this one item and said that this was the key to everything, and have this strange, almost hyper-focus on it ever since. There's a retread in Fallout 3 with their Nuka-Cola collection, the Nuka-Cola plant, the Nuka grenade. Fallout 4 has a guy addicted to Nuka-Cola. Nuka-Cola is not the center of the universe. It was just a fucking item in the original game, and the fact that Bethesda focuses so intently on it is just another nail in the coffin of how much I don't fucking understand this series. It's like the epitome of a lack of creativity. Once again, they could have done anything. They had a blank check here to make something really fucking cool and unique, and they decided to do the single most creatively lazy thing they could and base it around a brand of pop. I also talked about the game covers already, but it's worth bringing up purely for the sake of pointing out that the nostalgia bait exists with this, too. This was going to be a small section of its own, but I realized most of the smaller issues I had ended up being related to bigger issues in earlier parts, and got covered during those discussions, and all I had left were these few small points to make. One of the best parts of Bethesda Fallout are the limb-splosions when you kill an enemy. The over-the-top gore is kind of funny and can be very satisfying. For some odd reason I can't even begin to comprehend, certain characters in the game are protected from this feature. For example, most, if not all of the railroad shitheads, will never have their limbs or heads explode into gore chunks, as if they're too special and important to be chunkified. I have done extensive testing on this. You could unload thousands of explosive rounds into them and their corpses, and they will never explode, and I do not know why this is the case. It's not like these characters all have special unique items on them or anything of the sort. It just seems like Bethesda doesn't want their big important characters turned into meat chunks. In part 2 of this analysis series, some footage was recorded with a mod that allowed me to kill and gib such characters. Speaking of special characters, the issue with essential characters returns with a vengeance in the weirdest way possible. So most story-critical characters outside of Preston and Sturgis can be killed now, including all the Railroad and Institute, and most, if not all, of the Brotherhood. However, walk into Diamond City or Good Neighbor and start shooting, and the essential NPCs come out of the goddamn woodwork. For some reason you're completely disallowed from killing certain characters, like the Doctor in Diamond City, and this shit is annoying as it's ever been. And before anyone mentions that characters are essential because they're quest givers, that isn't necessarily true either. Mo, for example, is a quest giver, and you can kill him without completing his quest. In previous Bethesda titles, to wait, all you had to do was just press a button and select the time you wanted to wait. It worked this way for Morrowind, Oblivion, Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, and even Skyrim. But for some god-awful and incredibly obnoxious reason, they decided to say fuck player convenience, and now you have to sit down or go to sleep on a bed in order to pass time. It might not sound that bad, just find a chair forehead, but it does become a bit of an issue if there happens to be no furniture nearby, or if you're in power armor, because you have to exit the power armor, wait, then get back in and see the animation for it each time. It's totally unnecessary and redundant, and I don't understand why they made this awful change. Further, waiting or sleeping now takes far more time than it really should. This is a minor point, but in my experience, waiting a full day could take up to 45 seconds long, which doesn't seem like much, but if there's ever any reason to wait for time to pass in-game, it adds up fast. Waiting for Virgil to be cured of being a super mutant takes 3 days, I believe, which means I have to fast travel away, spend a few minutes waiting and not doing anything, then fast traveling back. In Morrowind, time passing was pretty much instant. In Oblivion, Fallout 3, New Vegas, and Skyrim, it was decently quick and you had the ability to stop it early if you wanted to. This time around, Bethesda decided to add in some mini-games for some reason. I don't have a problem with it. In fact, I think it's a nice little addition. But I did want to point out that I find it incredibly amusing that these mini-games are just pre-existing games like Space Invaders and Pitfall, but they're reskinned to be Fallout themed, somewhat ironically reflecting Bethesda Fallout being a Fallout reskin of their style of games. When following an NPC for a quest, you will oftentimes run into an issue where they go through a door, and the door becomes inactive for a few seconds where you can't use it. This obviously isn't the biggest of issues, but it is irritating. I feel the design of many of the big buildings is at odds with the rest of the Fallout franchise. Even from the early games, much of the old world architecture is a more gothic style, whereas in Fallout 4 it feels like the ruins of a rather generic looking sci-fi world instead, with many of these bright colored buildings and designs. At times it feels like a game from a different franchise for this reason. At least on a visual level. I've gone over extensively why this game feels like a game from a different franchise for many other reasons. I should have mentioned this in part 1, but I had forgotten about it and only investigated after part 1 was completed. But when people mention that Deacon follows you around the world in disguises, people mention that he's done so from the very start of the game. While I haven't been able to find him in this spot, there is strangely a railroad lookout camp positioned to look directly at the elevator of Vault 111. By the time you reach the spot, no one is there, but it is marked with the railroad's symbol for ally. It shouldn't be surprising, but this is essentially Bethesda fixing something that wasn't broken by breaking it. Good job. The whole point of Deacon being everywhere, or so I thought, was so he could explain away how he knows about you in advance, because if he didn't appear in disguises around the world, then it would appear as if they had just pulled knowing you over their ass. While I think it's clunky and not very good, it's still at least better than nothing. At least until I found out about this dumb little outpost, because it now implies precognition, that they know that anyone will be coming out of there, and worse, if you join the railroad, it means that they were right that you're an ally. If you happen to wipe them out, however, then it devalues the implied trust these marks are supposed to have, as they were clearly wrong about you. This is more of an oversight on my part, but there's one part about the Master's interaction I missed covering in part 2. See, each voice from the Master represents different parts of his consciousness. The robotic voice is clearly the more analytical side of him. The angry voice obviously represents hostility and rage, and the female voice represents a more emotional side, with his regular voice simply being the Master himself. The other voices come into his speech when those particular aspects of his personality are getting stronger, such as the initial burst of anger, when he says he doesn't have to prove anything to you, or the more logical and analytical parts of his mind processing and conveying information. The best part of all this, however, is that when he's coming to terms with the truth, that the super mutants are sterile and will die out, all 4 aspects of the Master's personality align in that very moment.
But it cannot be. This would mean that
all my work
has been for nothing. Everything that I've tried to...
A failure!
It can't be.
It's essentially saying that no aspect of him can deny the truth any longer. It's a really great moment in an already great part of the game, and I regret not putting this in with the rest of the breakdown of his personality and conversation in part 2 of this analysis series. In conclusion, Fallout is a long-running and beloved franchise known for its strong and well-told stories, player choice that has impact upon the world, intricate world-building and deep RPG mechanics, and Fallout 4 is the latest mainline entry in that series, in which its story is broken on nearly every level. Not a single major plot point comes out unscathed. It contradicts itself anytime it has something to say, and it tramples not only the established lore, but its own lore with impunity and without care, for the sake of convenience of whatever the writer wants at that particular moment. Choice has been stripped out near to the point of not existing at all, and what little choice you do have is largely either meaningless, or the effects of said choice are never delved into. The world building is piss poor, and clearly wasn't thought out, and its RPG mechanics at best have been lobotomized, and at worst have been outright amputated. This is a story in which the main villain faction have no clearly defined motivations or goals, and half the time the game tries to treat them if they aren't even the bad guys, as if they're simply misunderstood, despite the fact that they're both directly and indirectly responsible for untold death and suffering on a scale larger than we've seen previously in this series, aside from the apocalypse itself, especially when taken in full context and understanding the sheer amount of time this has been going on. No villain we've faced in any previous mainline Fallout game has done as much damage as the Institute has. The Institute is unequivocally evil, and the game itself doesn't seem to think so. Hell, the theme that plays inside the Institute is fucking called Humanity's Hope. They are directly responsible for the stagnation of the post-apocalypse society and the complete failure of any kind of significant growth or rebuilding in the past 50 or so years at the very least. They've kidnapped and killed people, they've replaced them with synths, they've wiped entire towns off the map while killing everything in their way. They've released a super mutant scourge upon the surface, while kidnapping and turning people into super mutants for decades. They slaughter all the innocent people in Vault 111 for literally no reason, and despite all of that, if you side with the Institute, they will be portrayed in a positive light. Piper will write a fluff piece, essentially defending them now that you're in control, and Mama Murphy, if you fail to do the right thing and kill her as soon as humanly possible, has a vision of the future that's portrayed in a positive light. As if you being the leader changes anything, as if this erases the decades of death and suffering at the Institute's hands. And this is assuming Nate or Nora really are good people, as the game seems to do, since there's no karma system. There is no justice to be had. The Institute never has to answer for its crimes. The slate is just wiped clean because there's no one to stand up to them now. The only people who could stand up to them are wiped out, and they're given an insanely useful power source, and this is treated as though it's a good thing. This would be like if when Hitler died, control of the Nazis then went to a total pacifist who hates war and only wants the best for humanity, but had no actual control over them. Putting a good person in charge of an evil faction with a very long trail of blood left in its wake does not change the history of that faction, nor does it undo the damage it has done, and yet, the game seems to think that it does. I question if the writers even understand what they've written here. Are they even aware? And the whole reason any of this is even happening in the first place is because of the goddamn synths, which come across as an afterthought, despite being one of the central pillars of this game's story. They are the main motivation of 3 of the main factions in this game. Every aspect of their functionality and existence seems to be contradictory. Bethesda simultaneously treats them both as robots and as humans on a complete whim based on whichever version is more convenient to them at the time. Synths don't need food, wait, yes they do. Synths don't need sleep, wait, yes they do, wait, no they don't. If they want to leave the question to you, of whether they're truly human, or just machines that imitate emotion really well, that's one thing. But there's a difference between leaving things vague and making things outright contradictory, especially when providing information that would prove certain aspects of their existence one way or the other. This is a story in which the entire first half makes no sense to exist the way it does, because Sean wants to meet you. So there's no good reason to dump you into the wasteland and face countless dangers, including his own army of synths and professional killer Cyborg to go find him. so they instead come up with this crappy throwaway line in an attempt to explain away the entire first half of the game even existing the way it does, and it still doesn't even make any goddamn sense in the slightest. This is a story-focused game in which they can't keep any details on any level consistent. I genuinely do not understand how you accidentally write something this insanely contrived and contradictory by complete accident. In a game all about 4 major factions interacting and going to war with each other, they come across entirely shallow. They barely interact with each other. The Brotherhood, Railroad, and Institute should all be building conflict with one another until the climax of the game, where you wipe out your enemy factions, but instead we barely get anything. All 3 interact in the Battle of Bunker Hill, and mass fusion will turn the Brotherhood hostile in the Institute and Railroad paths, but that's about the extent of their interaction. The rest of the game has you doing chores for each faction, while the Minutemen are off playing in a fucking sandbox. The game gives you the option to help the man who is freeing synths, after you've wiped out the only people on the outside who could have even helped escape synths. This is a game in a series that has traditionally allowed you to create your own character, in which it does not allow you to create your own character. The game writes your backstory for you, then proceeds to do absolutely fucking nothing with it. This is supposedly a story-heavy game in which good writing is the exception, not the rule. A world where whenever you find something potentially interesting, it's just yet more generic enemies to kill. This is a game in a series all about interacting with people, in which most of its characters, with rare exception, seem to exist purely for utility, and any personality they have is thrown on to cover it up. A rubber mask over the animatronic so it almost resembles a human. Characters so shallow, they're essentially one single character trait and nothing more. A world so shallow that you can't even measure depth, it's just a damp fucking floor. An RPG about choice, where the average quest is about pumping as many bullets as you need to make everything stop moving in a given location, and the biggest choice you get is whether you want to kill a couple extra NPCs, and the only choice with significant impact upon the world is whether you want to join the bad guys, or set off another massive nuke in this already ruined world, and the game doesn't even have the balls to tell you what the long-term consequences of these choices are. A story-heavy RPG about choice, where they thought it was a good idea to implement a system of pointless, shallow, self-generated garbage quests to go collect a thing, or kill a thing, or go place a thing in a location. A game in which many of its unique named quests are so absurdly simplistic and shallow that many players confuse them for Radiant quests. A series all about your impact on the world, telling you the long-term ramifications of your actions, and the game ends with a generic cutscene, where the only difference is whether you join the bad guys or not. An aspect said ending doesn't even properly acknowledge, it's just your character being sad over the main fucking antagonist dying. An RPG, where all of its core RPG mechanics have been stripped out or dumbed down to the point of not being an RPG anymore. A supposed RPG, where its RPG mechanics feel like a goddamn afterthought. A supposedly story-heavy RPG, in which its best features are collecting literal garbage and shooting everything that moves. The 5th game in a series with no respect at all for the games that came before it, just trampling and shitting all over established history and lore purely for the sake of the writer's convenience, because they want to add something brain-dead fucking stupid to the game, and because they don't care about the history of the series. They care about the marketability of it and nothing more. A game in which combat is the focus above all else, and the combat is mediocre at best, where enemies rarely, if ever, react to getting hit, where rather than making combat interesting through use of intelligent AI, enemies will stand out in the open 90% of the time and just tank your bullets. A game where bullet-spongy enemies are augmented to be even more bullet-spongy. A game in a series where character interactions was much of the substance, but that substance has been whittled down to 4 options that don't even respect what little choice the system gives you, and a good 85% of the time, most of the dialogue you hear is shared between options, but the game still has important information to understand that you can permanently miss because it is so exceptionally poorly designed. A game in a series that was supposed to be about exploring the morality of the post-apocalypse, not building a better plasma gun, that strips out that morality question and makes that game all about building that better plasma gun, and shooting it at every living fucking thing you see. Is it any wonder many fans of the series consider this to be the worst mainline Fallout game? This is pretty much everything Fallout 4 has to offer you, and if that does genuinely sound appealing to you, then to each their own, I guess. But I fucking despise this game, and I hate what its success implies for the future of this series. Because for me, and many Fallout fans like me, who care about the story, and characters, and world building, and well-written quests, and well-designed conflicts and choices with impact on the world, there is a little hope for there to ever be a good Fallout game ever again. Bethesda made bank on one of the most poorly written stories I've ever seen, where the heart of the series has been torn out by the goddamn roots and replaced with a gun. So why would they have any reason to ever change? Why would they ever have any reason to return to Fallout's roots? Fallout 76 had one of the most disastrous launches of all time, and was shown to be exceptionally poorly made through and through. And Bethesda has proven through the power of ignoring criticism that they could even turn that mess into a success in terms of generating money for them, because they never would have supported it for this long had it been a money sink. What the hell is there to even be excited for in the eventual Fallout 5? Getting to see a new part of the wasteland? With the Brotherhood again? A tidal wave of plot holes, contrivances, and lore breaks, and shallow characters, and a game all about shooting everything that moves again? Because that's a grim future this beloved franchise faces. For all intents and purposes, this franchise is dead, because everything that was Fallout has been torn out and cast asunder, and what Fallout has become is something entirely different. It's like the fucking Thing, just infecting this series, supplanting and imitating it, but being a complete abomination with nothing left of the original, except for what you see on the surface. And with that, I think I'm done here. After about 14 hours of tearing the shit-fucking game a new asshole, I've finally reached the end. At least, the end of the base game. I still have the DLC to cover after all. But even so, it's both a relief to finally be finished with the base game, and also it just feels weird to have finally reached this point. I started both this YouTube channel and released the original version of part 1 of this analysis series back in 2018, just 3 years after the game came out. And now here I am, nearly 5 years later, 18,000 subscribers later, and having completely remade parts 1 and 2, and finding yet more issues, and finally completing coverage of the base game. When I started, I had no idea how deep it would go, how long these videos would be. Hell, I didn't even know this video would be over 4 hours long until I was almost done it and rewrote the conclusion section and this end bit, and I had no idea the channel would ever grow to be this big. Nor did I know how infectious the desire to make videos would be. I very much mean this from the bottom of my heart. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed and shown support for the channel over the years. Thank you for sticking with me, and thank you to everyone who both made it to the end of this video and has watched the whole analysis series so far. It really does mean a lot. As for parts 5 and 6 of this analysis series, I do want to get them done as soon as possible. I do have other things I want to cover, and Starfield is just around the corner, and who knows how much video I'll need to make on that. But I do want to put Fallout 4 behind me. These videos do take a long time to make. There's a lot of research, footage gathering, scripting, recording, and editing that go into them, and I appreciate people's patience with new entries into analysis series yet to be completed. But I do absolutely plan on finishing all currently open projects. And one last time, thank you for watching.